I'm Olivia Jensen, 29, and the apartment I spent 5 years saving for just became the center of family drama. During our monthly dinner, my parents casually announced, "Your sister will live in your apartment," as if my hard-earned space was community property. While I nodded and sipped my wine, internally I was screaming. The look in my mother's eyes said this wasn't a suggestion, and my sister's entitled smile told me everything I needed to know. Before I dive into how this family ambush unfolded, and what I did next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had family members who think your boundaries are just suggestions. Growing up as the middle child in the Jensen family meant living in the shadow of perfectionism and expectations that seemed to apply differently to each of us. Being the first one to graduate college meant something to me, but almost nothing to my parents, who viewed my education as the bare minimum rather than the achievement it was for someone who worked 3 jobs while maintaining a full scholarship. My apartment in downtown Portland wasn't just 4 walls and a ceiling with exposed brick and morning sunlight that painted the hardwood floors golden. It represented every extra shift I picked up at the campus coffee shop, every tutoring session I squeezed in between classes, and every penny I saved instead of joining friends for weekend getaways. When I signed that lease 2 years ago, I finally felt like I had something that was entirely mine, something tangible that represented my independence from a family dynamic that had always left me gasping for air and recognition. My older sister, Rachel, had always been the golden child, the one whose artistic talents were celebrated with gallery showings funded by my parents, while my academic achievements warranted nothing more than a perfunctory, "That's nice," over dinner. Rachel moved in and out of our parents' house like it had a revolving door, always after another failed relationship or career setback that somehow wasn't her fault. She'd arrive with suitcases full of designer clothes bought with our parents' credit card, crying about how unfair life had been to her, and they would comfort her with spare keys to their vacation property or a new car to help her get back on her feet. Meanwhile, I drove the same used Honda Civic I bought in college, meticulously maintained because I knew no replacement was coming if it broke down. My younger brother, Ethan, was the baby of the family, perpetually excused from responsibility, because he was finding himself through a series of abandoned hobbies and half-finished online courses that my parents funded without question. The 3 of us existed in separate orbits within the family, receiving vastly different expectations and support, with me always caught in the middle, expected to be both independent and endlessly accommodating. The pattern of my parents making decisions that affected my life without consulting me wasn't new. When I was 16, they volunteered me to babysit my cousin's children every weekend for an entire summer, informing me only after they'd already made the commitment. During college, they gave my off-campus apartment address to distant relatives who needed a place to stay during a family wedding, calling me the morning of their arrival. Each time I tried to establish boundaries, I was met with accusations of selfishness and reminded of family obligations that somehow never seemed to apply to my siblings. The past year had been different, though. I'd finally found my footing in my career as an environmental consultant, earning respect and recognition that didn't depend on my family's approval. I'd started seeing a therapist who helped me understand that setting boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary for my mental health. I had even successfully declined hosting Thanksgiving, breaking a tradition that had always left me exhausted and unappreciated. These small victories had made me feel like I was finally gaining control over my relationship with my family, establishing myself as an adult with choices rather than a perpetual people-pleaser. The monthly family dinners remained my concession to tradition, a controlled environment where I could maintain connection without sacrificing too much of myself. Little did I know that this particular Sunday dinner would test every boundary I had worked so hard to establish, forcing me to decide, once and for all, if I was willing to stand up for myself, even when it meant standing alone against the united front of my family's expectations. The aroma of my mother's signature pot roast filled the house as I arrived, precisely 10 minutes late, a small act of defiance I allowed myself each month. My father answered the door with his typical brisk hug and immediate commentary on Portland traffic, as if my delayed arrival was a personal affront rather than a deliberate choice. Rachel was already there, perched on the living room sofa with a glass of wine, her designer boots propped on our mother's antique coffee table, a liberty I would never have been granted. Ethan arrived 20 minutes after me, receiving only warm smiles and an affectionate, "We were about to start without you," from our mother. The beginning of dinner followed its usual script, my father dominating conversation with his opinions on politics and business, while my mother interjected with questions about everyone's week that were really setups for her to share neighborhood gossip. I was midway through a practiced, sanitized update about my work when my father cleared his throat, the universal signal in our family that the real agenda was about to begin. "Rachel has some news," he announced, as if introducing a presidential address. My sister looked up from her phone, which she had been scrolling through beneath the table, her expression shifting from boredom to practiced vulnerability. "Jason and I broke up," she said, naming her boyfriend of 8 months whom I had met exactly once at a family barbecue where he spent most of the time talking about his cryptocurrency investments. "He's being totally unreasonable about the apartment lease, saying I need to keep paying even though I'm moving out." My mother reached across the table to squeeze Rachel's hand sympathetically. "It's just not right. She shouldn't have to deal with this stress on top of a broken heart." I nodded automatically, the appropriate sisterly response, while mentally calculating how long I needed to stay before making my escape. "So," my father continued, cutting into his roast beef with surgical precision, "we've worked it all out. Rachel will move into your place while she gets back on her feet." The casual delivery of this bombshell made it all the more shocking, as if he were announcing a change in dinner plans rather than the invasion of my personal space. My mother smiled brightly, already moving on to logistics. "It makes perfect sense. Your apartment has that spare room you use as an office, and you're always saying how you work late at the office anyway. Rachel just needs a few months to find her own place and recover." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied these moments, the physical manifestation of boundaries being bulldozed. "I actually use my office," I said, carefully measuring each word. "I've been taking on freelance projects that require a dedicated workspace." My sister rolled her eyes, not even bothering to hide her dismissal. "You can work at the kitchen table. I did that all through college." The fact that her college experience consisted of an art degree funded entirely by our parents, completed in 5.5 years with multiple mental health breaks, went unmentioned. "It's just temporary," my father added with finality, as if that addressed all possible objections. Family helps family. My mother was already on her phone, scrolling through her calendar. "We can help move her things next Saturday. Your building has visitor parking, right?" I watched them planning the dismantling of my personal space, the sanctuary I had created for myself, with the same enthusiasm they once showed planning Rachel's 16th birthday party, while forgetting my 18th. My brother caught my eye across the table and quickly looked away, unwilling to be drawn into a conflict that didn't directly affect him. I recognized the familiar crossroads: speak up and face the collective disapproval of my family, or remain silent and surrender my boundaries once again. This time, however, something shifted inside me. Instead of the anxious need to please that usually accompanied these moments, I felt a calm clarity. "I'll need to check my lease about long-term guests," I said neutrally, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. Of course, my mother waved away my concern. "But that's just formality. They can't stop you from helping your sister." I nodded again, letting them believe my compliance was assured while mentally drafting a completely different plan. The conversation shifted to the logistics of Rachel's move, with no one bothering to ask if I had plans for the weekend they had commandeered or considerations they had overlooked. I offered minimal responses, letting them mistake my quiet for agreement, rather than strategic retreat. As I helped clear the dishes after dessert, mapping out my response in my head, I realized I had reached the point where acquiescence was no longer an option I could live with. The drive home from my parents' house had never felt so liberating, my car becoming the transitional space where the dutiful daughter was replaced by a woman finally ready to take control. Sitting in my car outside my apartment building, I turned off the engine but didn't immediately get out. The familiar post-family dinner emotional hangover was settling in, but this time it came with a new sensation, something between righteous, anger, and absolute clarity. I played the dinner conversation over in my mind, hearing my parents' voices assigning my sister to my home without a single genuine question about my thoughts or feelings. The pattern was so clear now that I could almost laugh at its predictability. My needs always subordinate, my space and time treated as community resources while my siblings were sacrosanct. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my objections in the name of keeping the peace, all the small surrenders that had accumulated into the expectation that I would always bend. "Not this time," I whispered to my reflection in the rear-view mirror, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and walked through each room, seeing it with fresh eyes, appreciating the sanctuary I had built for myself. The office they so casually suggested I dismantle contained not just my workspace, but the physical representation of dreams I was still building, projects that mattered to me, regardless of whether my family understood their value. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, determination replacing the resignation I usually felt after these family encounters. First, I reviewed my lease agreement, confirming what I already suspected. Subletting without management approval was prohibited, and guests staying longer than 2 weeks needed to be added to the lease with proper background and credit checks. Rather than seeing these as obstacles, I recognized them as the framework for my response. Next, I called my friend Megan, who had witnessed the slow erosion of my boundaries over years of friendship. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I explained the situation. "Oh, hell no, Liv. You can't let this happen again." Her indignation was validating in a way my own emotions rarely were, her outsider perspective confirming that my family's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable. "I'm not going to," I said, surprising myself with my conviction. "I just need to figure out how to handle this without causing a complete family meltdown." We talked through options, discarding the direct confrontation approach that had failed in the past. My family had mastered the art of overwhelming opposition through sheer persistence and united guilt-tripping. This situation called for strategy, over confrontation, action over argument. "What if you just weren't there?" Megan suggested. "What if when they show up with Rachel's stuff, you're simply unavailable?" The idea took root immediately. I had vacation days accumulated, and a work conference in Seattle the following month that I could potentially move up. My mind raced with possibilities, not just for avoiding the immediate conflict, but for establishing a precedent that would reshape my family relationships going forward. After ending the call with Megan, I researched tenant rights more thoroughly, taking notes on the legal protection of my occupancy. I contacted my building manager via email, inquiring about the visitor policy and security protocols, framing my questions as general interest rather than specific concern. By midnight, my initial anxiety had transformed into methodical planning. I created a document outlining each step needed to secure my space and my boundaries: schedule adjustment, communication strategy, legal considerations, and contingency plans. I considered who might temporarily occupy my apartment during my absence, someone whose presence would make it impossible for my sister to simply move in. My colleague Derek had recently mentioned needing a place to stay while his condo underwent emergency repairs. He was responsible, professional, and unknown to my family, making him the perfect temporary occupant. The final piece clicked into place when I realized I could create a legitimate short-term sublease for Derek, documenting the arrangement in a way that would stand up to my family's inevitable attempts to circumvent it. As I finally went to bed, exhaustion mingled with a newfound sense of empowerment. For perhaps the first time, I wasn't lying awake rehearsing explanations or apologies for standing up for myself. Instead, I was planning a resolution that would force my family to recognize me as an adult, with rights they could not override, regardless of their expectations or sense of entitlement. The path ahead would be uncomfortable and possibly painful, but as I drifted off to sleep, I knew with absolute certainty that the discomfort of confrontation would be far more bearable than the slow suffocation of surrendering my independence yet again. The week following the family dinner unfolded with methodical precision as I implemented each phase of my plan. Monday morning began with a visit to my building's management office, where I spoke with Tanya, the property manager who had approved my lease application 2 years earlier. "I'm considering having a friend stay while I'm away for work," I explained, careful to frame the situation in neutral terms. "I wanted to make sure I understand all the policies about guests and temporary occupants." Tanya provided the visitor guidelines and sublease paperwork, explaining that any stay longer than 14 days required management approval and a background check for the occupant. I nodded, feigning casual interest while mentally noting how These policies contradicted my family's assumptions. And just to clarify, if someone showed up claiming to be moving in without this paperwork, I asked. Absolutely not permitted, Tanya stated firmly. Security would prevent entry without authorization, and we take that very seriously. It's for everyone's safety and compliance with occupancy laws. Armed with this confirmation, I texted my colleague Derek during lunch, explaining my situation in professional terms while omitting the more dysfunctional family dynamics. I need someone responsible in my apartment while I'm away for 2 weeks. There would be a formal sublease to protect both of us. Would you be interested? Derek's response came within the hour, expressing gratitude for the timing given his ongoing condo repairs. We arranged to meet Wednesday after work to review the arrangement and complete the necessary paperwork. Tuesday evening, I received the first text from Rachel. Mom says I should check with you about what furniture I should bring. I'm thinking my bedroom set would look better in your spare room than whatever you have in there. The presumptuous tone confirmed I was making the right decision. I crafted a deliberately vague response. I'm figuring out some logistics about the apartment situation. Let's touch base next week. This non-committal reply bought time while revealing nothing of my intentions. Wednesday proceeded with purpose as I met with Derek, showing him around my apartment and explaining the temporary arrangement. We completed the sublease agreement, making it official with both signatures and a copy for building management. There's one more thing, I added, slightly uncomfortable but determined. My family doesn't know about this arrangement, and they may show up expecting me to be here. If they do, you're under no obligation to let them in or explain anything beyond the fact that you're the legal occupant during this period. Derek, having dealt with his own family complications following his divorce, nodded with understanding. I can handle that. Just the facts, no drama. That evening, I scheduled my work trip to coincide with my family's planned moving day for Rachel, booking a hotel in a nearby coastal town where I could decompress while maintaining phone access, if absolutely necessary. Thursday morning, I contacted IT at my company to request remote work accommodation for the following week, citing personal circumstances requiring temporary relocation. With my professional obligations secured, I began preparing my apartment, moving important documents and irreplaceable items to a small storage unit I rented for the month. I carefully documented the condition of my apartment, taking photos of each room for comparison upon my return. By Friday, my mother had called twice requesting details about my building's parking access and asking if I could clear out some of those bookshelves to make room for Rachel's essential items. I responded with brief texts about being swamped with work deadlines and promises to work everything out before next weekend. I intentionally created the impression of busy acquiescence while finalizing the details of my counter strategy. Saturday involved setting up a small security camera in my living room, positioned to monitor the entry area, a legal precaution I never imagined needing against my own family. I gave Derek a set of keys, the building access code, and written authorization for building security. That evening, my father texted, "We'll arrive around 11 a.m. Saturday. Have the parking pass ready and clear space in your closet for Rachel's winter clothes." The commanding tone, devoid of any question marks or consideration for my schedule, reinforced my resolve. Sunday morning, I met with Derek for a final walkthrough, confirming he understood the boundaries of the arrangement and providing emergency contact information that notably excluded my immediate family members. As I packed my own bag for my work trip, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm determination. My phone buzzed with a final text from my mother. "Rachel's so excited about her fresh start at your place. This will bring you girls closer together." I left this message unanswered, recognizing it as another attempt to frame their imposition as a gift I should be grateful for. By Sunday evening, everything was in place. I had reclaimed my power not through confrontation, but through careful planning and legitimate exercise of my rights. As I set my phone's notifications to silent mode except for work contacts and Derek, I prepared myself for the inevitable storm that would erupt when my family's expectations collided with the reality I had arranged. The boundaries I had established, on paper, were about to be tested in real life, and for once I felt ready to hold my ground against the tidal wave of family pressure that had always previously swept me away. The days leading up to my family's planned invasion of my apartment brought an increasing stream of one-sided communications that confirmed I had made the right decision. Monday morning began with a text from Rachel. "I'm donating your guest room furniture to make space for my bedroom set. Hope that's cool. No question mark, no real request for permission, just an announcement of decisions already made about my property. I didn't respond immediately, letting the presumption hang, unanswered while I focused on preparing for my temporary absence. By lunchtime, my mother had called twice, leaving voicemails about paint colors Rachel was considering for her room and asking if I could take down the depressing photography from my hallway to make space for Rachel's collection of framed concert posters. The casual dismissal of my carefully curated home decor, pieces I had selected to represent memories and moments important to me, stung in a familiar way but strengthened my resolve. Tuesday evening brought a call from my father, his tone mixing authority with manufactured concern. "Your mother says you haven't been responding to her texts about Rachel's move. Is there a problem we need to discuss?" The question wasn't actually an invitation for honest communication, but rather a thinly veiled directive to fall in line with their plans. "I've been swamped with work," I responded, the half-truth coming easily. "Just finishing up some projects before the weekend." His satisfied grunt told me he had interpreted my answer as compliance, exactly as I had intended. Wednesday escalated. Further, when Rachel sent a group text to our family announcing she had given notice at her apartment and scheduled movers for Saturday. "So excited for sister bonding time," she wrote, tagging me with a series of heart emojis that felt more like claiming territory than expressing affection. My mother responded with enthusiastic planning for a moving day lunch they would bring to my apartment, while my father chimed in with logistics about borrowing his colleague's truck for the larger furniture items. The conversation continued. Without my input, a stream of decisions and arrangements flowing past as if my participation was optional, but my compliance was guaranteed. That evening, I met with Megan for dinner, my last opportunity to see her before I implemented the final phase of my plan. "They're really doing this, aren't they?" she asked, scrolling through the screenshots I showed her of my family's messages. "They have absolutely no doubt you'll just roll over and let them take over your space." I nodded, picking at my food, as the reality of the confrontation ahead settled in my stomach like a stone. I know this is the right thing to do, but I still feel guilty, like I'm being mean or selfish for not helping my sister. Megan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Liv, listen to me. Having boundaries isn't mean. Expecting basic respect isn't selfish. They're the ones being inappropriate here, not you." Her words were a lifeline, reinforcing the perspective I was still struggling to fully embrace. Thursday brought the most presumptuous development yet when my mother forwarded me an email confirmation for a furniture delivery to my address, scheduled for Monday after the move. "Rachel found the perfect desk for her creative projects. Don't worry about the cost, it's our housewarming gift to her." The staggering entitlement of arranging deliveries to my home without consulting me sent a wave of indignation through my body so strong it momentarily overrode my anxiety. I forwarded the confirmation to Derek with a brief note explaining he should refuse any deliveries for Rachel, then blocked my mother's email address from my work account to prevent further distractions. Friday, the day before their planned arrival, my phone began ringing with increasing frequency. My father called 3 times during my morning meetings, each voicemail more irritated than the last. "We need the visitor parking pass code," the first one stated. "Call your mother about the parking situation," demanded the second. By the third, his patience had clearly evaporated. "Olivia, this is ridiculous. Call us back immediately about tomorrow's arrangements." My mother alternated between guilt-inducing messages about Rachel's fragile emotional state following her breakup and passive-aggressive reminders about family obligations. "Your sister would do this for you," she texted, conveniently forgetting the time I needed emergency housing after a pipe burst in my first apartment, and Rachel had claimed her spare room was being used for art storage. By early evening, I had packed my bag for my weekend away and finalized arrangements with Derek, who would move in later that night. I set an out-of-office email response citing a work emergency requiring immediate travel, deliberately vague but official sounding. As I prepared to leave, my phone lit up with a final message from my father. "We'll be at your building at 11 a.m. Sharp. Rachel's entire apartment is packed and ready. Don't make this difficult." The commanding tone, so familiar yet now so clearly inappropriate, cemented my decision. I took one last look around my apartment, noting how peaceful it felt in the quiet before the storm. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing to prioritize my own boundaries over my family's expectations. And despite the anxiety churning, in my stomach I also felt an unfamiliar sense of self-respect blooming in my chest. As I locked my apartment door and handed the keys to Derek in the hallway, I allowed myself to acknowledge the painful truth. Sometimes establishing healthy boundaries with family feels like a betrayal precisely because they've trained you to betray yourself instead. The real test would come tomorrow when they arrived expecting compliance and found their assumptions shattered against the reality I had carefully constructed. Saturday morning dawned with perfect northwest autumn clarity, the kind of crisp, sunny day that typically energized me. I awoke in my hotel room 30 miles from my apartment, feeling both nervous anticipation and surprising calm about the boundary I was finally enforcing. My phone, which I had kept on Do Not Disturb overnight, showed 5 missed calls from my mother starting at 7:30 a.m., 3 from my father, and a series of increasingly frantic texts from Rachel. "On our way," the first message announced cheerfully at 9:15. "Dad borrowed Uncle Steve's truck for my dresser. So excited." By 10:30, the tone had shifted. "Where are you? We need the parking pass." At 10:45, "Call Mom now. We're almost there." I sent a brief text to Derek confirming my family was en route and received his calm response. "Got it. Everything's under control here." Then I silenced my phone again and ordered room service breakfast, determined to protect my mental space during what I knew would be a challenging few hours. At precisely 11:03 a.m., my security app pinged with motion detection at my apartment door. Opening the application, I watched the scene unfold in real time. My parents and Rachel stood in the hallway outside my unit, my father pounding on the door with increasing force while my mother repeatedly rang the doorbell. Rachel paced behind them, gesturing animatedly while talking on her phone, presumably trying to reach me. After several minutes of unanswered knocking, my father pulled out his phone and appeared to call building management. I imagined the conversation, with the weekend security staff explaining that no, they could not provide access to an apartment for individuals not on the lease, regardless of family relationship. The security footage continued as my family retreated temporarily, likely heading to the lobby to strategize. 20 minutes later, they returned with a building security officer who appeared to be explaining something that caused my mother to throw her hands up in exasperation. My father's posture stiffened in the way it always did when he encountered resistance to his plans, his authoritative demeanor failing to impress the security professional who was simply doing his job. Just as they seemed ready to leave, the apartment door opened, revealing Derek in casual weekend attire, coffee mug in hand. Even without audio, I could see my family's shock in their body language, the physical recoil of surprise. Derek appeared, perfectly calm, likely explaining his legal occupancy, while my family struggled to process this unexpected development. My mother's hand flew to her chest in her signature gesture of distress, while my father leaned forward aggressively until the security officer stepped between them. Rachel stood frozen, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage as the reality of the situation became clear. The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes before the security officer escorted my family back toward the elevator. My father's rigid back and my mother's animated gesturing suggesting heated emotions, barely contained. As they disappeared from the camera's view, I exhaled slowly, realizing I had been holding my breath while watching the encounter. Within moments, my phone exploded with notifications. Voicemails from my father threatened everything from calling the police to report an unauthorized occupant to coming to my workplace on Monday if I didn't respond immediately. My mother's messages escalated from confusion to accusation. "How could you do this to your sister? We've raised you better than this." Rachel's texts were less restrained, a stream of all-caps invective questioning my character, loyalty, and basic human decency. I forwarded the most concerning messages to my friend Megan, who had offered to monitor the situation in case legal intervention became necessary. "Your family is melting down," she texted back after reviewing them. "But you're completely within your rights. Stay strong." Around 1 p.m., Derek called to give me a first-hand account of the confrontation. "Your father tried to insist they had your permission to enter," he explained. "When I showed them the sublease agreement, he claimed it must be fraudulent." The security guy had to remind him that attempting unauthorized entry could result in police involvement. He chuckled lightly. They left when your dad realized he was creating a scene in front of your neighbors. Your mom said they would address this betrayal directly with you. I thanked him for handling the situation so professionally and asked if he felt comfortable continuing with our arrangement given the conflict. Absolutely, he assured me. Your family's drama doesn't change our agreement. Your home is secure. By early evening, the initial barrage of calls and texts had slowed, replaced by a more strategic approach. My aunt called, clearly enlisted as a mediator, her voice gentle with practiced concern. Everyone's worried about you, Olivia. This isn't, like you, shutting out your family when they need you. I let her voicemail play to completion, but didn't return the call, recognizing the familiar pattern of using extended family to apply pressure when direct methods failed. My father's final message of the day came at 10:30 p.m., his voice deliberately controlled but underlined with anger. Your mother is distraught. Rachel has nowhere to go. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. This childish stunt ends now. Call us in the morning to arrange access to your apartment. As I prepared for bed in my quiet hotel room, I felt an unexpected sense of peace despite the day's chaos. For the first time, I had set a boundary and held it firm against the tidal wave of family pressure. The guilt and anxiety were still present, familiar companions after years of emotional conditioning, but alongside them was something new and fragile. Pride in my own strength and the certainty that I deserved the basic respect of being consulted about my own living space. Tomorrow would bring more confrontation as my family adjusted to this new reality, but tonight I allowed myself to recognize a simple truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both yourself and others is to stop participating in unhealthy patterns, even when, especially when, that disruption causes discomfort. The path to healthier relationships begins with the courage to say no when saying yes would require the sacrifice of your self-respect. Sunday morning arrived with the strange quietness that follows upheaval, like the stillness after a thunderstorm. I checked my security feed first thing, relieved to see no unexpected visitors had attempted to return to my apartment overnight. My phone showed fewer messages than I expected, suggesting my family might be regrouping to develop a new strategy. The first text came from Rachel at 7:15 a.m., her tone dramatically different from yesterday's rage. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I have nowhere to go. Is this because of that time I borrowed your sweater in high school and stretched it out? I said I was sorry for that. The attempt to minimize the situation by referencing a trivial past conflict rather than acknowledging the genuine boundary violation in the present was so characteristic of our family dynamics that I almost laughed despite the tension. I didn't respond, recognizing the message as the first move in the familiar dance of deflection and guilt manipulation. By mid-morning, my mother had shifted from anger to bargaining, her voicemail suggesting compromises that still fundamentally disregarded my autonomy. Maybe Rachel could just stay for 2 weeks while she finds another place? We could pay you a little rent if that's what this is about. Family helps family, Olivia. The implication that my boundary was motivated by financial interest rather than basic respect for my space and independence revealed how deeply she misunderstood my position. My father's communication style evolved as well, moving from commands to calculated reason. I understand you feel we should have discussed this more thoroughly. That's fair. Let's sit down like adults and work out a solution that helps your sister while respecting your concerns. His measured tone couldn't disguise the underlying assumption that the end result would still be Rachel moving into my apartment, just with the veneer of my consent added to legitimize the arrangement. Around noon, I received an unexpected text from my brother Ethan, who had remained conspicuously silent throughout the conflict. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Rachel's staying at their place and complaining nonstop. Not sure what happened exactly, but whatever you did to stand up to them, respect. His message was the first acknowledgement from any family member that my resistance might be justified, and it provided a small but significant counterbalance to the overwhelming pressure from the rest of the family. Derek updated me throughout the day, reporting that building security had increased patrols of my floor after my family's confrontational behavior raised concerns. Your father called the management office this morning, he informed me. The weekend manager told me he demanded to speak to someone about fraudulent sublease documentation, but was informed all your paperwork was properly filed and legally binding. The failed attempt to override my arrangements through building management confirmed my decision to handle this situation through official channels rather than emotional appeals had been the right approach. By Sunday evening, extended family members began weighing in, clearly having received a carefully edited version of events. My grandmother called to express her disappointment that I wouldn't help poor Rachel during her time of need. My mother's sister emailed a lengthy message about the importance of sibling bonds and how I would regret this selfishness when I was older and needed family support. I archived these messages without responding, recognizing them as the next phase in the escalation pattern, the widening of the conflict to include allies who would apply additional pressure. Monday morning brought practical concerns as my father sent a terse message about Rachel's furniture, which was apparently sitting in a rented moving truck accruing daily fees. This situation is costing us money now. What do you suggest we do? With your sister's belongings? The question was the closest thing to an acknowledgement that their original plan had failed, and they were being forced to consider alternatives. I didn't respond immediately, letting the reality of consequences for their presumptuous actions settle in without my intervention. By Monday afternoon, my mother had reverted to emotional appeals, sending a photo of Rachel looking forlorn surrounded by boxes in my parents' living room. "This is what your stubbornness has caused," the caption read, a transparent attempt to transfer responsibility for their failed plan onto me. I muted the conversation and spent the evening researching family therapists in our area, recognizing that if any healthy relationship was to be salvaged from this situation, professional guidance would be essential. Tuesday brought the first sign of genuine recalibration as my father's tone shifted from demanding to pragmatic. "We're looking at apartment listings for Rachel. Let us know when you're ready to discuss what happened." The brief message contained no apology or acknowledgement of overstepping, but the pivot to finding alternative housing for my sister represented the first tangible evidence that my boundary was being recognized, if not yet respected. That evening, I crafted a careful response, my first direct communication since the confrontation. "I'm glad you're helping Rachel find her own place. I'll be back in town Friday and am willing to meet and talk on Saturday afternoon." The message was intentionally neutral, offering an opportunity for discussion without apology for my actions or emotional engagement with their accusations. Wednesday and Thursday passed with minimal contact, suggesting my family was processing the situation in their own way. Rachel sent one message asking if I could store just a few boxes in my apartment until she found a place, which I politely declined, maintaining the boundary I had established. By Friday morning, as I checked out of my hotel, I felt ready to re-engage with my family from a position of newfound strength. The past week had been challenging but transformative, forcing all of us to confront patterns of interaction that had gone unquestioned for decades. As I drove back toward the city, I recognized that the upcoming conversation would be difficult but necessary, the first step in either rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms or accepting that some distance might be required to maintain my hard-won independence. Either way, I was approaching the situation as a full adult with legitimate rights and boundaries, not as the perpetual accommodating daughter whose needs always came last. That shift in perspective, more than any practical outcome, represented the true victory in this painful but necessary confrontation with family dynamics that should have been challenged long ago. Saturday afternoon arrived with golden autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the neutral territory I had selected for our family meeting, a quiet coffee shop equidistant from my apartment and my parents' house. I arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a corner table with good visibility of the entrance and enough privacy for our conversation. Ordering a cappuccino provided a moment to steady my nerves and review the key points I had prepared, determined to remain calm and clear, regardless of how my family approached the discussion. My mother arrived first, 5 minutes early as was her habit, her expression carefully composed but her rapid blinking betraying her nervousness. She moved to hug me, hesitating when I offered a hand instead, the small gesture establishing new boundaries from the outset. My father and Rachel arrived together moments later, my father's face set in the stern expression he adopted when preparing for difficult negotiations. Rachel's eyes red-rimmed from either tears or lack of sleep. An awkward silence fell as they settled into their seats, the familiar family dynamic temporarily disrupted by the unprecedented situation. My father cleared his throat, assuming his usual role as conversation director. Well, Olivia, I think you owe us all an explanation for your behavior last weekend. The framing was predictable, positioning me as the transgressor despite their actions, and I recognized it as the opening gambit it was. Actually, I replied, keeping my voice deliberately. I think we need to discuss why you all made plans for my apartment without consulting me first. My directness clearly surprised them, my mother's eyebrows rising as my father's mouth tightened at the corners. Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly very interested in stirring her untouched coffee. We were trying to help your sister? My mother began, her voice sliding into the gentle remonstrance that had diffused countless family conflicts in the past. You have that extra room just sitting there while Rachel needed a place to stay. Family helps family. The familiar refrain hung in the air between us, a maxim I had heard countless times when sacrifices were expected of me, but rarely when I needed support. I understand Rachel needed help, I acknowledged, but deciding she would move into my home without even asking me first wasn't help. It was an invasion of my space and disregard for my autonomy. My father leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. This melodramatic terminology isn't helpful, Olivia. Invasion? Autonomy? We're talking about your sister needing temporary housing, not some philosophical debate about personal boundaries. The dismissal of my concerns as melodrama was another familiar tactic, one that had effectively silenced me in past conflicts. This time, however, I had anticipated the move and prepared my response. It is about boundaries, Dad. Healthy ones. Would you have made these arrangements for Rachel to move into Ethan's apartment without asking him first? The question landed, with visible impact, my father sitting back slightly as he considered. My mother jumped in quickly. That's different. Ethan's situation is different. The vague justification highlighted the double standard I had lived with for years, making it impossible to ignore. Different how? I pressed gently. Because you respect his space and decisions in a way you don't respect mine? Rachel finally spoke, her voice wavering between defensiveness and genuine confusion. I didn't know they hadn't talked to you about it first. They told me you were fine with the arrangement. Her revelation shifted something in the conversation, suggesting my parents had misled not just me, but also my sister about the level of communication that had occurred. My mother flushed slightly, her gaze dropping to her coffee cup. We were going to discuss the details with you, but we knew you'd be agreeable once you understood Rachel's situation. The presumption inherent in her statement hung in the air, impossible to ignore. That's exactly the problem, I said quietly. You didn't talk to me because you assumed I'd say yes regardless of my own needs or circumstances. You treated my home as community property rather than my personal space. My father started to respond, but paused, seemingly processing my words with unexpected consideration. The momentary silence stretched until he finally spoke, his tone notably less combative. Perhaps we should have approached this differently. Your living situation is your own business, and we overstepped. The acknowledgement, however reluctant, was more than I had honestly expected, and I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen slightly. My mother's expression remained troubled, her innate desire for family harmony clearly battling with the disruption to established patterns. We just want what's best for both our girls, she said, reaching toward me again. You've always been so independent, we sometimes forget to check if you need your space. The qualifier sometimes understated decades of boundary violations, but I recognized the statement as the closest thing to an apology I was likely to receive in this initial conversation. Rachel looked between our parents, then directly at me, her expression more genuine than I had seen in years. I'm sorry, Liv. I should have called you directly instead of just assuming everything was arranged. That was really inconsiderate. Her apology, unqualified and straightforward, surprised me most of all. Thank you for saying that, I replied sincerely. I would have been happy to help you find solutions if I'd been approached respectfully. The conversation shifted then, moving from accusation to tentative problem-solving. My father mentioned several apartments they had found for Rachel, more affordable than she had initially wanted, but within her budget with some parental assistance. My mother suggested a family gathering to help Rachel move once she secured a place, carefully adding, "if everyone's available," with a meaningful glance at me. As the tension gradually eased, I introduced my final prepared point, the one I had been most nervous about addressing. Going forward, I need certain boundaries respected, direct communication rather than assumptions, consulting me about decisions that affect my life before they're made, and respecting my right to say no without being made to feel selfish or difficult. My father nodded slowly, the businessman in him recognizing reasonable terms, even if the father in him struggled with the changing dynamic. Fair enough. We'll try to be more mindful. My mother reached across the table, not to touch me, but to place her hand near mine, a gesture of connection without presumption. We love you, Olivia. Sometimes we get caught up in managing everything and forget that you're an adult with your own life now. As we prepared to leave, arrangements tentatively made for helping Rachel with apartment viewings the following weekend, I felt both exhausted and cautiously optimistic. The conversation hadn't solved everything. Decades of family patterns couldn't be restructured in a single coffee shop meeting, but it had established a precedent for more respectful interaction that I was determined to maintain going forward. Rachel hung back as our parents headed to their car, catching my arm gently. "I really am sorry," she said, her voice lower and more sincere than the performance contrition she had often deployed in family conflicts. "And I'm kind of impressed, actually. I've never seen anyone stand up to Mom and Dad like that." Her acknowledgement of the difficulty and significance of what I had done provided unexpected validation. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but it was necessary for all of us. As I watched them drive away, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because all problems were solved, but because I had finally found my voice in the family conversation that had excluded it for so long. Returning to my apartment after Derek's sublease ended felt like coming home to a space that was truly mine in a way it hadn't been before. The physical surroundings were unchanged, every piece of furniture and decoration exactly where I had left them. But something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to this sanctuary I had created for myself. Standing in my living room that first evening alone, I ran my hand along the bookshelf my father had so casually suggested clearing. For Rachel's belongings, appreciating how each object represented choices I had made for myself, rather than accommodations for others' expectations. The week following our coffee shop conversation brought subtle but significant changes in my family's communication patterns. My mother called rather than texted about family matters, her carefully worded questions actually framed as requests, rather than assumptions. "We're helping Rachel look at apartments on Saturday if you'd like to join us," she offered, the tentative phrasing acknowledging my right to decline without judgment. My father's communication remained more distant, but noticeably more respectful. His habitual directives replaced by informational updates that required no response. Rachel surprised me most, reaching out to suggest lunch, just us sisters, with an openness I hadn't experienced with her since childhood. Our meal together revealed aspects of her perspective I had never considered, including her own struggles with our parents' expectations, and her genuine belief that I had willingly agreed to share my apartment. "They always made it sound like you were happy to help, eager even," she explained, picking at her salad. "I never questioned it because it fit the story they always told about you being the responsible, accommodating one." Her words illuminated how our parents had shaped our perception of each other, casting us in complementary roles that prevented genuine connection. "I'm trying to be more independent," she admitted. "Seeing you stand your ground made me realize how much I've let them handle everything in my life." The conversation marked the beginning of a more authentic relationship between us, one based on direct communication rather than roles assigned by our parents. The process of rebuilding family dynamics on healthier terms wasn't without setbacks. My mother occasionally slipped into old patterns, making comments about how my new attitude was making family planning more complicated. My father sometimes responded to my boundaries with cool distance, his discomfort with the changed power dynamic evident in his reluctance to engage directly. Family dinner the following month was tense at moments. The established roles we had, all played for decades, not easily abandoned despite conscious efforts. Yet amid these challenges, I found my own confidence growing. Each time I politely but firmly maintained a boundary, the paralyzing guilt that had previously accompanied any self-advocacy diminished slightly. When my mother called asking me to host Thanksgiving despite my earlier refusal, I was able to decline without the hours of anxious justification that would once have followed such a conversation. "That doesn't work for me this year," I stated, simply offering to bring side dishes to whoever did host but remaining firm in my decision. The brief silence before her acceptance of my answer felt like victory, small but significant. Rachel found an apartment in early December, a modest one-bedroom closer to her workplace than she would have previously considered. I helped her move in, our collaboration lacking the tension that had characterized so many of our past interactions. As we arranged her furniture, she confided that she had started therapy, partly inspired by my example of setting boundaries. "I need to figure out who I am outside of being the artistic, emotional daughter who always needs rescuing," she explained as we assembled her bookshelf. "I want to be someone who can handle her own life." Her vulnerability in that moment created a bridge between us stronger than any we had built in childhood, founded on mutual respect rather than assigned family roles. The holiday season brought the ultimate test of our family's evolving dynamic when we gathered at my parents' house for Christmas dinner. My mother had called ahead to ask what dish I could contribute rather than simply assigning one, a small, but meaningful acknowledgement of my adult autonomy. My father greeted me with a warmth that had been absent since our confrontation, his gradual acceptance of the new family balance evident in his genuine questions about my work and plans for the new year. As we exchanged gifts and shared stories, I noticed subtle shifts in everyone's behavior. My parents consulting each other rather than making unilateral decisions, Rachel gently declining my mother's unsolicited career advice, my own comfort, in expressing opinions that diverged from family consensus. The evening wasn't perfect, old patterns occasionally emerging before being consciously redirected, but it represented genuine progress toward healthier family relationships. Driving home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past few months, from the family dinner where my parents had assigned my sister to my apartment, to this holiday gathering where boundaries were beginning to be acknowledged, if not yet fully respected. The process of healing family relationships distorted by years of unhealthy dynamics would be ongoing, requiring continued vigilance and occasional reinforcement of boundaries. Yet the fundamental shift had occurred, not just in how my family treated me, but in how I viewed myself in relation to them. I had discovered that standing up for myself didn't have to mean cutting ties or constant conflict, but rather creating space for more authentic connection based on mutual respect rather than prescribed roles and unexamined expectations. As I unlocked my apartment door, returning to the space I had fought to protect, I felt grateful not just for these walls and this sanctuary, but for the stronger sense of self I had discovered within them. The most valuable lesson from this painful family confrontation wasn't about property rights or living arrangements, but about the fundamental truth that healthy relationships require both love and boundaries, both care and respect. By finally saying no to a boundary violation I would once have silently accepted, I had opened the possibility of saying yes to a more genuine connection with my family, one built on who we truly were rather than who we were expected to be. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to protect your boundaries? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest people to set boundaries with are the ones we love most, but as I learned, it's often the healthiest thing we can do for ourselves and our relationships. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and personal growth. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for building authentic relationships that can truly stay.
I'm Vanessa, 34, and despite 7 years of marriage to Gregory, I've always felt like an outsider in his family. Last summer at their annual BBQ, I hoped things would finally be different. Gregory's sister Amanda had other plans. While everyone gathered around the picnic table, I tried sharing news about my graphic design work. Amanda interrupted with a smirk. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The table erupted in laughter, even Gregory. I just raised my hot dog, locked eyes with her, and said, "Challenge accepted." I moved out that night. If you're enjoying this story already, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe to hear what happened when I reappeared a year later. Gregory and I met during our final year at university. I was studying graphic design while working part-time at a local coffee shop to pay tuition. He was completing his business degree, fully funded by his parents. We connected when he came in for a late-night study session and started chatting about the book I was reading behind the counter. Our romance was a whirlwind. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. By graduation, he proposed with a ring that cost more than my entire student debt. I was swept away by his charm, intelligence, and what I perceived as genuine love. When we married a year later, I thought I was entering not just a partnership, but a new family. The Caldwells were everything my family wasn't: affluent, well-connected, and tight-knit in their own particular way. Richard, Gregory's father, built a successful marketing firm from the ground up. Patricia, his mother, managed their social calendar with military precision while serving on 3 charity boards. Amanda, his sister, followed in their father's footsteps, already a junior executive at his company by 27. Michael, the younger brother, was the family rebel who still somehow landed a cushy job at his uncle's investment firm. My own background couldn't have been more different. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, I grew up understanding the value of $1 and the dignity of hard work. My sister Olivia and I shared a bedroom until I left for college. Holidays meant homemade gifts and potluck dinners with neighbors. When I first visited the Caldwells' sprawling colonial home, I felt like I'd stepped onto a movie set. The class differences were subtle but persistent. Patricia would compliment my crafty design work as if it were a cute hobby rather than my profession. Richard would explain basic business concepts to me at dinner, despite my having run my own freelance business for years before meeting Gregory. Amanda would helpfully correct my pronunciation of wine varieties or designer names, always with a saccharine smile. "They mean well," Gregory would say whenever I brought up these microaggressions. "Amanda's just trying to help you fit in. That's how she shows love." But Amanda's love felt more like a slow poison. At our wedding, she gave a maid of honor speech that included several stories about Gregory's ex-girlfriends. When we announced we were buying our first home, she questioned if the neighborhood was really the right fit for a Caldwell. When I landed a major client, she wondered aloud if they hired me because of Gregory's family connections. Despite this, I tried. God, how I tried. I volunteered for Patricia's charity events. I referred clients to Richard's firm. I remembered everyone's birthdays with thoughtful gifts. I laughed at their inside jokes even when they stung. I dressed differently for family gatherings, adopted their vernacular, and swallowed my working-class pride when conversations turned to vacation homes and boarding schools. For the first few years, I maintained my freelance design business, building a modest client list and gaining some recognition in local circles. Then Gregory received an opportunity to expand his division at work, if he was willing to travel extensively. Without discussion, it was assumed I would scale back my career to manage our home life. My business dwindled to a few loyal clients. As I became increasingly isolated, my world narrowing to Gregory's intermittent presence and his family's judgmental orbit. Last spring, I miscarried at 11 weeks. The physical pain was excruciating, but the emotional aftermath was worse. Gregory was in Chicago for a conference. He offered to come home but seemed relieved when I said I could manage. Patricia sent flowers with a note that said, "Perhaps it's for the best until you're more settled." Amanda suggested that stress from trying to maintain your little business might have been a factor. Only Olivia came to stay with me for a week, bringing homemade soup and sitting with me through tear-soaked nights. The contrast between her genuine care and my in-laws' clinical distance cracked something fundamental in me. But I buried it deep. Another disappointment to swallow in service of maintaining family harmony. By the time the annual summer BBQ rolled around, I was a diminished version of myself. My design work had become mechanical, my friendships had atrophied, and my marriage felt increasingly like a performance. Still, I held on to a fragile hope that things could improve, that I could somehow earn genuine acceptance from the family I had married into 7 years ago. The Caldwell Summer BBQ was a neighborhood institution. Patricia spent weeks planning the menu, Richard showcased his collection of grilling gadgets, and dozens of family friends and business associates milled about their perfectly manicured lawn. It was the event where family status was displayed and reinforced, where loyalties were confirmed and outsiders were identified. And despite my years of marriage to Gregory, I remained firmly in the outsider category. The morning of the BBQ, I spent 3 hours making my grandmother's strawberry shortcake, the one dessert that had received genuine compliments in previous years. Gregory was busy on calls, finalizing details for his upcoming business trip to Tokyo. When it was time to leave, he rushed me out the door, concerned about being fashionably late versus actually late. "Remember, Dad's unveiling his new imported smoker today," he reminded me as we drove. "Try to act impressed even if you don't get why it's a big deal." I nodded, clutching my dessert carrier on my lap. My sundress, bought specifically to match Patricia's preferred casual elegance dress code, already felt tight across my shoulders. The Caldwell home bustled with activity when we arrived. Caterers weaved through groups of guests delivering appetizers. Richard stood centered on the patio, surrounded by admiring friends as he demonstrated his new smoker. Patricia floated from cluster to cluster, her laugh tinkling like expensive crystal. "Finally!" Amanda called out, spotting us as we entered through the side gate. She air-kissed Gregory, then gave me a quick once-over. "Vanessa, that dress is so cheerful. The kitchen's getting crowded, but I'm sure you can find somewhere to put your contribution." She swept Gregory away before I could respond, linking her arm through his and launching into a story about running into his college roommate. I stood alone, dessert in hand, scanning the backyard for a friendly face. I made my way to the kitchen, where Patricia was directing the catering staff with precise instructions. "Oh, Vanessa dear," she said, noticing me hovering in the doorway. "You didn't need to bring anything. We have the patisserie handling desserts." She gestured vaguely toward the pantry. "But how thoughtful. Perhaps put it there for now?" I placed my shortcake on a shelf, already crowded with other contributions from guests not worthy of display. As I exited the kitchen, I overheard Patricia instructing a server to make room for Amanda's authentic tiramisu at the center of the dessert table. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of polite smiles and truncated conversations. I'd start chatting with one of Gregory's cousins, only to have them pulled away by Patricia to meet someone important. I offered to help set up the buffet line but was told the caterers had a system. I tried joining a conversation about recent films but couldn't get a word in edgewise. Michael's wife, Charlotte, received entirely different treatment, despite being married into the family for only 2 years. Patricia proudly introduced her to everyone as our Charlotte, the pediatric surgeon. Amanda included her in reminiscences about family vacations she couldn't possibly have attended. Even Richard, who rarely engaged with in-laws, asked detailed questions about her work. The contrast wasn't lost on me, nor was the irony that Charlotte looked as uncomfortable with the attention as I was with the lack of it. When lunchtime arrived, Gregory reappeared at my side, having spent the morning deep in conversation with his father's business associates. "Having fun?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before guiding me toward the elaborate buffet line. We filled our plates and joined the main table on the patio. I ended up seated between Gregory's elderly Uncle Frank, who was hard of hearing, and a space left open for Amanda, who was still serving herself. Gregory sat across from me, already engrossed in conversation with Richard about Japanese business etiquette. Amanda finally arrived, setting her meticulously arranged plate down, and instantly commanding attention with an anecdote about a celebrity she'd spotted at her gym. Charlotte asked appropriate questions. Patricia beamed with pride. Even Frank shifted to hear her better. During a brief lull, I saw my opportunity. "I just finished a branding project for that new bakery downtown," I offered. They're having their grand opening next weekend." Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly. "How nice. Is that the place with the tacky neon sign? I drove past it yesterday." "The signage is actually vintage-inspired," I explained. The owners wanted to honor the building's history as one of the first. If you disappeared tomorrow, Amanda interrupted with a theatrical sigh, no one would even notice. That's how boring this conversation is. The table erupted in laughter. Patricia tittered behind her napkin. Richard guffawed. Even Gregory chuckled, reaching for his beer. Frank, who likely hadn't heard the comment, joined in automatically. Tutter. Sound surrounded me like cold water, shocking my system. I felt simultaneously hypervisible and completely invisible. My face burned, but my hands turned ice cold. In that moment, 7 years of accumulated slights crystallized into perfect clarity. Didn't cry. I didn't storm off. I didn't create a scene that would later be recounted as evidence of my emotional instability. Instead, I raised my hot dog in a mock toast, met Amanda's gaze directly, and said clearly, "Challenge accepted." A brief, confused silence fell over the table. Amanda's smile faltered slightly. Gregory looked between us, sensing something had shifted but unable to identify what. Then Patricia chirped, "Who's ready for Richard to carve the brisket?" And the moment passed. For the remainder of the afternoon, I observed rather than participated. I watched how easily they all moved through their world of assumed privilege and belonging. I noted how Gregory seamlessly blended with his family while occasionally throwing me an absent smile. I cataloged every slight, every exclusion, every moment I was spoken over or around. Most importantly, I listened to the quiet voice inside, me that had been whispering for years, now finally loud enough to hear, "You deserve better than this." By the time we gathered our things to leave, my decision was made. The only question remaining was how to implement it. The drive home from the BBQ stretched in silence. Gregory checked emails on his phone, occasionally reading aloud snippets about his Tokyo trip. I stared out the window, mental calculations already running beneath my outward calm. When we reached our driveway, he finally seemed to notice my unusual quiet. "Everything okay? You've been off since lunch." I considered my words carefully. "Amanda's joke about me disappearing. Did you think that was funny?" Gregory sighed, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Don't start with this again. Amanda was just being Amanda. You know how she gets at family gatherings." "You laughed," I said simply. "It was a joke, Vanessa. Not everything needs to be analyzed to death." He got out of the car, effectively ending the conversation. That night, as Gregory slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying not just the day's events but the entire trajectory of our marriage. I thought about the bright, ambitious designer I'd been when we met. I remembered how confidently I'd handled clients, how passionate I'd been about my work, how deeply I'd connected with friends. Somewhere along the way, I'd started believing the subtle message the Caldwells had been sending, that I was lucky to be among them, that my inclusion was conditional upon my compliance, that my worth was determined by their assessment. I slipped out of bed at 2 a.m. and padded to my home office. I opened my laptop and began methodical research: bank accounts, apartment listings in Seattle where Olivia lived, transportation options. By dawn, I had a rudimentary plan. Gregory left for a morning golf game with Richard, kissing me absently, on his way out the door. The moment his car pulled away, I began executing my plan with surprising clarity. First, I called Jessica, my college roommate who had remained loyal despite my increasing isolation. "I need a massive favor," I said when she answered. "Name it," she replied without hesitation. "I'm leaving Gregory. Today. Can you come help me pack the essentials?" 2 hours later, Jessica arrived with coffee, packing supplies, and fierce determination in her eyes. We worked efficiently, identifying what I truly needed versus what could be replaced. Clothes, personal documents, irreplaceable mementos, and my design equipment took priority. "I can store whatever doesn't fit in your car at my place," Jessica offered, carefully wrapping a framed photo of my mother and me. While Jessica organized the physical items, I handled the financial separation. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings into my personal account, not a penny more, despite the temptation. I paid my share of the monthly bills that were due. I made a list of subscriptions and services to transfer or cancel. By mid-afternoon, my car was packed with the distilled essence of my life. Jessica hugged me fiercely before getting into her own vehicle. Call me when you're settled for the night. And Vanessa, I'm proud of you. Alone in what had been our home for 5 years, I wrote Gregory a letter. I kept it simple, stating that I needed time away to reevaluate our marriage. I explained that I had taken only what was indisputably mine and had contributed to outstanding bills. I asked for space and no contact while I sorted through my feelings. I did not share my destination. As a final act, I removed my wedding ring and placed it atop the letter on the kitchen counter. Next to it, I left a copy of Amanda's cruel joke, written verbatim, with the date and location noted clinically. Before leaving, I allowed myself one moment of sentimentality. I picked up our wedding photo from the hall table. We looked so happy, so full of possibility. Gregory's smile reached his eyes back then. My own face shone with hope and confidence I barely recognized now. "Goodbye," I whispered, replacing the frame and walking out the door without looking back. The sensation of driving away from our suburban neighborhood was both terrifying and exhilarating. With each mile marker, the tightness in my chest loosened incrementally. By the time I crossed the state line, I felt like I could fully breathe for the first time in years. I checked into a modest hotel that evening, using the credit card I maintained separately throughout our marriage. The room was simple but clean, nothing like the luxury accommodations the Caldwells considered standard. After confirming my safe arrival to both Jessica and Olivia, I turned off my phone. Gregory would be home by now, finding an empty closet and my letter. The thought brought neither satisfaction nor guilt, only a strange numbness. In the quiet anonymity of the hotel room, I curled under unfamiliar blankets and fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. Morning brought the first wave of messages when I briefly turned on my phone. Gregory's communications evolved exactly as I'd expected. Confusion, then irritation, then concern, then anger. "Where are you? Call me. This is ridiculous. Come home so we can talk. Your mother is worried. At least let her know you're safe. You're being incredibly selfish right now. I have the Tokyo trip in 3 days. Fine. Take your space. We'll talk when I get back." Not once did he mention Amanda's joke or his laughter. Not once did he acknowledge any understanding of why I might have. I sent a brief text to my mother, assuring her of my safety but requesting privacy. Then I turned off my phone again and opened my laptop to search for longer-term accommodations in Seattle. The challenge had been accepted. Now came the hard part, disappearing not just physically, but untangling myself from the identity I'd constructed as Gregory Caldwell's wife. I was about to find out if Amanda was right, if my absence would go completely unnoticed, or if I could rebuild a life where my presence mattered on my own terms. Seattle welcomed me with 3 days of continuous rain, as if washing away my old life. Olivia had found me a month-to-month furnished apartment in her neighborhood, a tiny studio with bay windows and creaking floors. After the sprawling suburban house Gregory and I had shared, the compact space should have felt claustrophobic. Instead, it felt like a snug cocoon. "The building's nothing fancy," Olivia apologized as she helped me carry in my limited belongings. "But the location is great, and the landlord doesn't ask too many questions." "It's perfect," I assured her, running my hand along the worn but solid kitchen counter. "It's just mine." That first week passed in a blur of practical arrangements. I opened a new bank account at a local credit union. I set up mail forwarding through Jessica rather than leaving a direct trail. I purchased a new phone with a Seattle area code. I created updated profiles on freelance design platforms, carefully curating my portfolio to remove work connected to Gregory's network. Gregory's messages continued, transitioning from anger to bargaining. "Whatever's going on, we can work through it," he wrote. "Just come home." I maintained my silence, not out of cruelty but self-preservation. Every time I considered responding, I remembered the laughter around that picnic table, the years of subtle diminishment, the gradual erosion of my identity. Amanda posted a passive-aggressive Instagram story 2 weeks after my departure. "Family is everything. You can't choose who stays and who goes." The comments filled with heart emojis from various Caldwell connections. Gregory's mother called my mother, expressing theatrical concern while fishing for information. Michael's wife, Charlotte, sent a tentative text, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I responded to none of them. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. Jessica shipped the remainder of my belongings in unmarked boxes. I found a therapist specializing in family dynamics and marital trauma, scheduling weekly sessions that often left me emotionally drained but incrementally stronger. "What Amanda said at the barbecue," Dr. Lewis commented during our third session, "that wasn't the cause of your departure. It was the catalyst." "The last straw," I agreed. "Tell me about the first straw," she prompted. That question unlocked a flood of memories, subtle digs disguised as helpful advice, achievements minimized, opinions dismissed, all while Gregory stood by, not malicious but complicit in his silence. By month 2, I had secured 3 steady design clients through online platforms. The work wasn't particularly creative, mostly formatting ebooks and designing social media templates, but it paid the bills. More importantly, each completed project rebuilt my professional confidence. One rainy Tuesday, I walked into a local coffee shop and noticed a striking wall mural. The barista saw me admiring it. "Beautiful, right?" "The owner commissioned it from a local artist," she explained while preparing my latte. "She's looking for someone to redesign our menu boards and promotional materials, actually." An hour later, I was sitting with Eleanor Marshall, the 50-something owner with silver-streaked hair and a straightforward manner I found immediately refreshing. "I don't care about your resume," she said, waving away the portfolio I'd pulled up on my tablet. "Show me your personal work, the stuff you do, because you can't not do it." I hesitated, then navigated to a folder I'd barely opened in years. These were designs I'd created for myself. Experimental, sometimes impractical, but authentically mine. Eleanor studied them in silence, occasionally zooming in on details. "You've been hiding," she finally said, looking up with sharp blue eyes. "These are good, really good. But recent?" "No," I admitted. "I haven't done work like this in years." "Why not?" The question was simple but struck like a physical blow. I found myself telling Eleanor an abbreviated version of my story, the creative passion I'd once had, the gradual sublimation of my style to suit the Caldwell aesthetic, the slow surrender of my artistic voice. Eleanor listened without interruption, then nodded once. "You're hired for the menu project, but on one condition." "What's that?" "You do one personal piece, something purely your own, every week. Bring it when we meet. I don't care if it's good or finished. I care that you're finding your voice again." Eleanor became more than a client. She became a mentor, pushing me to reclaim my creative courage with blunt feedback and unexpected encouragement. Through her, I connected with other local business owners needing design work. My calendar slowly filled with projects that engaged rather than depleted me. Meanwhile, Gregory's attempts at contact became less frequent. The divorce papers I filed through my lawyer were met with a barrage of calls that I didn't answer. Eventually, his attorney connected with mine. The proceedings moved forward with clinical efficiency, Gregory's initial resistance giving way to resignation. 4 months into my new life, I allowed myself to check social media. Gregory's profile showed him at a company event, smiling beside a woman I didn't recognize. Richard had posted about the Tokyo expansion, tagging Gregory with proud father emojis. Amanda shared multiple photos from a family dinner, captioned, "Missing no one." The confirmation stung less than I expected. Amanda had been right after all. My disappearance had barely caused a ripple in the Caldwell family pond. Somehow, this validation brought not pain, but liberation. I was no longer defined by their perceptions. 6 months to the day after leaving, I received the finalized divorce papers. Gregory had signed without contesting the straightforward division of assets. We'd negotiated through our lawyers. No alimony either way, a clean split of joint property, complete separation going forward. His only personal communication was a brief note. "I still don't understand, but I won't fight you anymore." That evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and cut my hair, shedding the long style Gregory had always preferred for a modern bob that framed my face. The woman who stared back seemed both familiar and new, thinner perhaps, with faint lines around her eyes, but with a clarity of gaze I hadn't seen in years. By month 8, my design business had expanded enough to require a small workspace outside my apartment. I rented a desk in a cooperative creative studio, surrounded by other independent artists and entrepreneurs. For the first time since college, I had colleagues who valued my input and challenged my ideas on equal footing. When the anniversary of my departure approached, I no longer needed to check social media to know what the Caldwells were doing. They had receded from my daily thoughts, becoming characters in a story I'd lived through rather than active presences in my life. Meanwhile, my new world continued expanding. A branding project for a local artisan food company won regional recognition. My redesign of Eleanor's coffee shop attracted attention from a lifestyle magazine. A comment I made during a design workshop led to an invitation to speak at a creative conference. 1 year after Amanda's fateful joke, I was no longer invisible. I had built a life where my presence was not only noticed but valued, where my voice was heard rather than interrupted, where my contributions were recognized rather than dismissed. The challenge had been met, but the story wasn't over yet. The email from Westwood Creative arrived exactly 52 weeks after the BBQ that changed everything. The subject line was innocuous, "Seeking designer for national campaign," but the content sent a jolt through my system. "Your work for Rainier Artisanal Foods caught our attention. We're developing a campaign for Sheffield consumer brands, and believe your aesthetic would be perfect for the project. Initial meeting next week if interested." Sheffield Consumer Brands was a subsidiary of Caldwell Marketing Group, Richard's company. The coincidence seemed too precise to be accidental. I called Eleanor, who had become my sounding board over the past year. "It could be completely legitimate," she reasoned after. I explained the connection. "Your Rainier campaign was featured in 3 industry publications. But the timing is suspicious," I finished. "The question isn't whether they know who you are," Eleanor said pragmatically. "The question is whether the project is worth taking regardless." I requested more information from Westwood. The project was substantial, redesigning packaging for Sheffield's entire organic line with a potential long-term contract for ongoing brand management. The budget they proposed was double anything I'd handled since establishing my Seattle business. After 3 days of deliberation, I accepted the initial meeting. If this was a Caldwell orchestration, I wanted to face it directly rather than wonder. And if it was legitimate, I didn't want fear of my past to constrain my future. The Westwood creative director, Thomas, made no indication he knew about my history with the Caldwells during our first meeting. We discussed design concepts, timeline, expectations, and budget particulars with straightforward professionalism. When I asked about client involvement, he mentioned only that Sheffield executives would review major milestones. I accepted the project, establishing clear boundaries about communication channels and approval processes. For 3 weeks, everything proceeded normally. My preliminary designs received positive feedback. The timeline remained on track. No Caldwell names appeared on any correspondence. Then came the announcement. Sheffield Consumer Brands would be featured at the annual Marketing Innovation Gala, unveiling their rebranded organic line as part of the presentation. As the lead designer, my attendance was highly encouraged. The gala was a major industry event, precisely the type of opportunity my rebuilding career needed. It was also exactly the sort of function the Caldwells never missed. Richard considered these networking evenings essential to maintaining the family's business prominence. Gregory had always dutifully followed his lead. "You have 3 options," my therapist observed during our session that week. "Decline to attend, and potentially limit your professional growth. Attend and attempt to avoid the Caldwells, which may prove stressful and ultimately futile. Or attend and prepare to engage with them on your terms." "What would you do?" I asked. Dr. Lewis smiled slightly. "I'm more interested in what Vanessa today would do, as opposed to Vanessa from a year ago." The question lingered as I left her office. Last year's Vanessa would have either declined the event entirely or attended as Gregory's apprehensive shadow, dreading Amanda's barbed comments and Patricia's conditional approval. But I wasn't that person anymore. The following morning, I emailed, "Thomas confirming my attendance." Then I made an appointment with a personal stylist recommended by Olivia and set aside a portion of the Sheffield advance payment for an outfit that would serve as both armor and announcement. The evening of the gala arrived with unexpected calmness. I surveyed my reflection in the hotel room mirror. The woman staring back wore a tailored jumpsuit in deep emerald that managed to be both sophisticated and distinctive in a sea of expected black dresses. My bobbed hair was now accented with subtle caramel highlights. The designer shoes, my one significant splurge, added 3 inches of confidence to my height. Most transformative, however, was the expression in my eyes. No anxiety, no apology, just steady readiness for whatever the night might bring. The venue was a restored historic theater downtown, its grand lobby transformed with strategic lighting and minimalist floral arrangements. I checked in at the registration desk, accepting my name badge and the signature cocktail offered by circulating waitstaff. I had barely taken 2 sips when Thomas appeared at my elbow, already introducing me to a cluster of industry executives. Their business cards disappeared into my clutch as we discussed emerging design trends and market demographics. I found myself speaking with easy authority, my opinions met with thoughtful nods rather than polite dismissal. 40 minutes into the event, I was deep in conversation with a magazine editor when I felt a shift in the room's energy. I didn't need to turn to know that the Caldwells had arrived. Richard's booming laugh confirmed it moments later. I maintained my position, finishing my point about consumer psychology before excusing myself to visit the bar. As I waited for a sparkling water, I carefully scanned the room. Richard and Patricia stood near the entrance, holding court among admirers. Amanda wasn't immediately visible. And then I saw Gregory, standing slightly apart from his parents, looking thinner than I remembered and somehow diminished despite his perfect tailoring. Our eyes met across the crowded space. His widened in unmistakable shock, lips parting slightly as if to speak despite the distance between us. I held his gaze steadily, neither smiling nor frowning, then deliberately turned my attention to the bartender, thanking him for my drink. The first encounter came minutes later. Richard approached while I was examining the event program. "Vanessa," he said, his tone conveying neither warmth nor hostility. "Quite a surprise." "Richard," I nodded, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm the lead designer for Sheffield's Organic rebrand." He blinked, momentarily disconcerted by my calm demeanor. I hadn't made the connection. Their creative is being handled externally through Westwood. "Yes, I'm working with Thomas's team. The preliminary market testing has been quite positive." I spoke as I would to any client's executive, professional and assured. "I see." He seemed to reassess me, noting the changes a year had brought. "Your work has evolved since you left." "Not evolved," I corrected with a small smile. "Returned to its authentic direction." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia is here somewhere. I'm sure she'd want to say hello." "Of course," I replied, neither encouraging nor discouraging the prospect. As Richard moved away, presumably to report his discovery to the family, I rejoined the Westwood team, seamlessly integrating into their conversation about upcoming presentation logistics. From the corner of my eye, I could see the ripple effect as Richard spoke to Patricia, whose perfectly maintained composure slipped momentarily as she sought me in the crowd. The Sheffield presentation was scheduled for the middle of the evening. As the time approached, Thomas guided me toward the staging area. We were nearly there when Amanda stepped directly into our path, her expression a complex mixture of surprise and calculation. "Vanessa, no one mentioned you were involved with this project." Her tone suggested this oversight was somehow my fault. "Amanda," I acknowledged. "I'm working with Westwood Creative. Thomas, this is Amanda Caldwell, Richard's daughter." Thomas extended his hand. "Ms. Caldwell, pleasure to meet you. Vanessa has been exceptional to work with. You know her work?" Amanda's smile tightened. "We're family, actually. Or were." "How nice," Thomas replied noncommittally. "Excuse us. We need to prepare for the presentation." As we walked away, Thomas glanced at me questioningly, but respected my privacy enough not to pry. I appreciated his professionalism more than he could know. The presentation itself passed in a focused blur. I spoke about design philosophy and consumer connection, demonstrated key elements of the rebranding strategy, and answered questions with composed expertise. The audience response was overwhelmingly positive, with several spontaneous rounds of applause. From my position on stage, I could see the entire Caldwell family seated together near the front. Patricia maintained a neutral expression throughout. Richard nodded occasionally at particularly impressive metrics. Amanda whispered something. To the woman beside her, her face unreadable. Gregory watched me with undisguised intensity, his eyes never leaving my face. After the formal presentation concluded, I was immediately surrounded by attendees with questions and compliments. Business. Cards were exchanged, potential opportunities mentioned, connections established. This professional validation, earned entirely through my own merit, felt like the sweetest possible vindication. Eventually, the crowd thinned as people moved toward the dinner portion of the evening. I was gathering my presentation materials when Gregory finally approached, alone. "You look well," he offered, hands tucked awkwardly in his pockets. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I didn't know you were in Seattle." That was intentional. He nodded, accepting this truth. "Your presentation was impressive. You always were talented." "I always am talented," I corrected gently. Present tense. Gregory looked down, then back up with unexpected directness. "I've thought a lot about what happened, about Amanda's joke and everything before that. I didn't understand at first, but this past year has been..." He paused, searching for words. "Clarifying." "I'm glad to hear that," I said, meaning it. "I miss you," he admitted quietly. The words hung between us, once so desperately desired but now arriving too late. I felt no triumph in his regret, no vindictive pleasure in his loneliness. Just a calm certainty that I'd made the right choice. "I need to join my team for dinner," I said, neither cruel nor encouraging. "Will you be at tomorrow's workshop?" "Yes. I'm presenting the digital integration segment." He nodded again. "Maybe we could get coffee afterward? Just to talk." I considered his request, weighing my own emotional landscape. "I can spare half an hour," I conceded. Professional courtesy, relief, flickered across his face. "Thank you." As I turned to leave, Patricia appeared at Gregory's elbow, her social smile firmly in place. "Vanessa, darling, what an absolute delight to see you thriving." Her words were perfect. Her tone betrayed her discomfort. "Patricia," I acknowledged. "I hope you're well." "We've all missed you at family gatherings," she continued, the practiced lie falling easily from her lips. "No one makes strawberry shortcake quite like yours." The old Vanessa would have accepted this olive branch, however disingenuous. The new Vanessa held her ground. "That's interesting," I replied pleasantly. "I recall my shortcake being relegated to the pantry while Amanda's tiramisu took center stage at the last gathering I attended." Patricia's smile faltered briefly before recovering. A simple misunderstanding, I'm sure. Multiple simple misunderstandings over 7 years, I agreed, maintaining my pleasant tone. How fortunate that I now work in environments where such misunderstandings rarely occur. Before Patricia could respond, the event coordinator announced dinner seating. I excused myself with polite finality, joining the Westwood team at their assigned table across the room from the Caldwells. The remainder of the evening passed without further direct interaction, though I occasionally caught Gregory watching, me from afar. As the event concluded, I declined the team's invitation for after-party drinks, preferring the quiet completion of returning to my hotel room alone. In the tranquil privacy of my room, I kicked off my designer shoes and stood at the window overlooking the glittering city. The confrontation I'd half-dreaded for months had come and gone, leaving me not depleted but strengthened. I had faced the Caldwells not as an apologetic outsider, but as a successful professional in my own right. Amanda's challenge: if you disappeared, tomorrow no one would even notice, had precipitated not just my physical departure, but a complete reinvention. The final irony was that by disappearing from their world, I had become more visible in my own. The morning after the gala dawned with unexpected sunshine streaming through my hotel room curtains. I prepared for the day's workshop with methodical focus, selecting a professional but comfortable outfit and reviewing my presentation notes over room service coffee. The Sheffield marketing workshop was being held in the hotel's conference center, a more intimate setting than the previous night's gala. As I arranged my materials at the presenter's table, I spotted Richard engaged in intense conversation with Thomas near the refreshment station. Their discussion appeared businesslike but not tense. Occasionally, Richard would nod or gesture toward the product displays. Attendees gradually filtered in, networking over pastries and coffee before finding seats. I was reviewing my slide deck one final time when Amanda entered, scanning the room with calculated casualness until her gaze landed on me. After a moment's hesitation, she approached, coffee cup clutched perhaps too tightly. "Good morning," she offered, her tone carefully neutral. "Thomas speaks very highly of your work." "Thomas is an excellent creative director," I replied. "The entire Westwood team has been exceptional." Amanda shifted her weight slightly. "I didn't realize you'd established yourself in Seattle. Your presentation last night was impressive." Coming from Amanda, this reluctant acknowledgement was practically effusive praise. I thanked her with simple courtesy, neither overreacting to the compliment nor dismissing it. "Father is considering bringing the entire Sheffield account in-house after this campaign," she continued, watching me closely. "He's been impressed with the direction." I understood the subtext immediately. If Sheffield became a direct Caldwell marketing client, my work would either disappear or be attributed to their in-house team. The old insecurity flickered briefly before I extinguished it. "That would be Richard's prerogative as Sheffield's parent company," I said evenly. "However, Westwood has contractual provisions regarding creative attribution that are quite specific. Thomas is particularly careful about protecting his designer's work." Amanda's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Before she could respond, the workshop facilitator called for everyone to take their seats. Our conversation ended with mutual, professional nods, a far cry from our last interaction over hot dogs and cruel jokes. The morning sessions proceeded efficiently, with presentations on market analysis and consumer demographics. My segment on digital integration strategies was scheduled just before the lunch break. As I took the podium, I noticed Gregory slipping into the back of the room, clearly having timed his arrival for my presentation. I delivered my content with confident expertise, demonstrating how the packaging designs incorporated augmented reality features and seamlessly connected to the broader digital ecosystem. The question period afterward was lively, with engaged participants and thoughtful discussion. When Richard himself asked about implementation timelines, I answered with specific benchmarks already agreed upon with the Sheffield team. As attendees broke for lunch, Gregory made his way toward me, but was intercepted by a Sheffield executive with urgent questions. I used the opportunity to step outside for fresh air, needing a moment away from the Caldwell gravitational pull. The hotel's courtyard garden provided a quiet respite. I had just settled on a bench when Patricia appeared on the pathway, her expression suggesting our meeting wasn't accidental. "You've always had excellent timing for escapes," she observed, smoothing her skirt as she sat beside me uninvited. "I prefer to call it recognizing when I need space," I replied. Patricia studied me with new attention. "You've changed." "I've reverted," I corrected, "to the person I was before I started trying to fit into spaces that weren't designed for me." She sighed lightly. "Families are complicated, Vanessa, especially established ones like ours. There are expectations, traditions, ways things have always been done. I'm aware. I spent 7 years observing those traditions, 7 years trying to meet those expectations. Perhaps we weren't always as welcoming as we could have been," Patricia conceded, the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. "But disappearing without a word was rather dramatic, don't you think?" I turned to face her directly. "I left a detailed letter for Gregory. I ensured all financial obligations were properly handled. I made a clear, adult decision to remove myself from a situation that had become harmful to my well-being. There was nothing dramatic about it." "Gregory was devastated," she countered. "Gregory was inconvenienced," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." Patricia's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. "You have no idea what this past year has been like for him, for all of us." "You're right," I acknowledged, "just as you have no idea what the previous 7 years were like. For me?" We sat in tense silence for a moment before I continued. "But I'm not interested in exchanging pain metrics, Patricia. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I'm good at what I do, and my work has value to Sheffield's campaign." Something shifted in Patricia's expression. Not quite respect, but perhaps a new awareness. "You always were stubborn." "Determined," I countered with a small smile. Another distinction worth noting. As we headed back toward the conference center, Patricia asked an unexpected question. "Will you be at the closing dinner tonight?" "Yes. Westwood has a table." She nodded thoughtfully. "The salmon is usually excellent." It was such a normal, mundane observation, the kind mothers-in-law typically share with daughters-in-law, that it momentarily disoriented me. I murmured agreement as we rejoined the workshop, separating to our respective tables. The afternoon sessions focused on implementation strategies. I participated actively but maintained professional distance, neither seeking nor avoiding the Caldwells. As the workshop concluded, Gregory finally managed to approach me directly. "Still up for coffee?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Yes," I agreed. "There's a shop in the lobby." We walked together in silence, the familiarity of his presence beside me both strange and nostalgic. Once seated with our drinks, his usual Americano and my latte, ordered without need for discussion, the awkwardness intensified. "Seattle suits you," he finally offered. "It does," I agreed. "The creative community has been welcoming." Gregory traced the rim of his cup. "I've been in therapy since you left. Dad thought it was unnecessary, but..." He shrugged. "It's been helpful." This surprised me. Gregory had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to tell you what you want to. "Here. I'm glad," I said sincerely. "My therapist helped me understand some things about our marriage, about my family." He met my eyes directly. "About how I failed to see what was happening to you, because it was easier not to." The acknowledgement was unexpected and disarming. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I had fallen in love with. Thoughtful, capable of growth, willing to examine himself. "Thank you for saying that," I replied quietly. "I didn't stand up for you," he continued. "Not against Amanda, not against Mom, not even against my own expectations that you would just adapt to whatever the family needed." "No, you didn't," I confirmed without rancor. "I've thought a lot about that barbecue, about Amanda's joke and how everyone laughed, How I laughed. He swallowed hard. I keep thinking about what you said. Challenge accepted. I didn't understand then what you meant. And now? Now I realize you were declaring independence. From all of us. His voice held equal parts admiration and regret. We talked for nearly an hour, longer than the half hour I'd allocated. Gregory shared how the family dynamics had shifted. In my absence, Amanda's increased criticism extending to his new girlfriend, Patricia's tightening control over family gatherings, Richard's disappointment when Gregory declined a promotion that would have required relocating. I'm seeing everything differently, he explained, like someone adjusted the contrast on a photo I've been staring at my whole life. When our coffee cups emptied, we both recognized the natural conclusion of our conversation. As we stood to leave, Gregory asked the question I'd been expecting. Is there any chance for us? Not right away, but eventually? I considered his face, once the center of my world. I felt affection, compassion, even a whisper of the old attraction. But the tether had been severed, not just by Amanda's joke or my departure, but by the year of growth that followed. I think we both needed to become different people, I said gently. And I like who I'm becoming now. He nodded, accepting this truth with surprising grace. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. We both were, I corrected. You just needed different circumstances to discover it. We parted with a brief, platonic hug that felt like proper closure. As I watched him walk away, I realized I truly wished him well in building a life that was authentically his, not just an extension of the Caldwell legacy. The final confrontation came unexpectedly, as I was collecting my portfolio from the conference room. Amanda entered just as I was preparing to leave, her purposeful stride suggesting she'd been waiting for this opportunity to catch me alone. I need to ask you something, she said without preamble, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. All right. I agreed, curious despite myself. Did you take this project knowing it was connected to our family? No, I answered truthfully. I discovered the Sheffield-Caldwell connection after accepting the Westwood offer. By then, the contract was signed. She studied me, seemingly assessing the truth of my statement. And you didn't think to recuse yourself once you knew? Why would I? I asked simply. I'm extremely good at what I do, Amanda. This project needed someone with exactly my skills and aesthetic sensibility. The fact that your family company might ultimately benefit from my work is incidental to my professional obligations. So it's just coincidence that exactly 1 year after you disappeared, you reappear working on a project connected to us? I had to smile at her persistence. Life rarely arranges itself with such perfect symmetry. But yes, essentially. I don't believe in coincidences that convenient, she countered. What would be the alternative explanation? I asked. That I orchestrated an elaborate year-long plan, building an entirely new career in another city, establishing relationships with agencies unconnected to your family, all culminating in this specific project? That would be giving you far more space in my thoughts than has actually been the case. The blunt assessment landed visibly. Amanda blinked, perhaps for the first time considering that she might not have been central to my decisions at all. At the barbecue, she said after a pause. When I made that joke, it was just a joke. I never thought you'd actually leave. It wasn't just a joke, Amanda. It was the articulation of something you'd been communicating for years. That I was dispensable, forgettable, unimportant. I kept my tone conversational rather than accusatory. And you weren't wrong, in a way. In the context of your family, I was those things. What I needed to discover was that there are contexts where I'm not. Amanda's composure slipped momentarily, revealing something rarely seen, uncertainty. Gregory hasn't been the same since you left. Gregory is finding his own way, I replied. As am I. And there's no chance of reconciliation? The question seemed driven by family concerns rather than genuine care for either Gregory or me. We've reconciled in the only way that matters, I said. We've both acknowledged the truth of our marriage and found peace with its ending. Amanda nodded slowly, absorbing this finality. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. Your presentation yesterday. It was genuinely good work. I would have said so regardless of who you were. Coming from Amanda, this professional acknowledgement represented a fundamental shift. I thanked her with simple sincerity, neither overvaluing the compliment nor dismissing it. As I left the hotel to prepare for the evening's closing dinner, I felt a strange lightness. I had faced each Caldwell individually, navigating these encounters, not as the insecure outsider of last year, but as a confident professional with clear boundaries. The family that had once loomed so large in my life now seemed properly proportioned, just people with their own limitations and complexities. The final dinner that evening unfolded with surprising ease. The Caldwells and the Westwood team were seated at separate tables, creating natural distance without obvious avoidance. When industry colleagues introduced me to Richard as the designer behind Sheffield's brilliant rebrand, he acknowledged my work with professional courtesy. When Patricia complimented my dress during a chance encounter at the dessert station, I accepted graciously. Most tellingly, when Amanda's presentation on upcoming marketing trends included a slide featuring one of my designs with proper attribution, I recognized it for what it was, a public professional acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable a year ago. As the evening concluded, I exchanged contact information with several potential clients, confirmed next steps with Thomas, and said appropriate goodbyes to industry colleagues. Gregory approached briefly, simply wishing me safe travels and good luck with a sincerity that needed no elaboration. Leaving the venue, I felt no dramatic sense of triumph or closure. Instead, I experienced the quiet satisfaction of having reclaimed not just my professional identity, but my personal sovereignty. The Caldwells were now simply people I had once known intimately who now occupied appropriate space in my past rather than outsized significance in my present. Amanda's challenge, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice, had been not just accepted, but transcended. I had disappeared from their world, only to reappear transformed in my own. 1 month after the marketing conference, I sat across from Eleanor at our regular corner table in her coffee shop. Seattle rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a cozy backdrop for our conversation. So the Sheffield campaign officially launches next week, Eleanor noted, refilling my cup from the ceramic pot between us. That must feel satisfying after everything. It does, I agreed. Thomas called yesterday to say early retailer response has been overwhelmingly positive. They're already discussing extending the rebrand to additional product lines. And the Caldwell connection? I considered the question thoughtfully. It's become professionally cordial. Richard's marketing director reached out about potentially collaborating on future projects through proper channels, with clear contracts. I haven't decided yet whether to pursue it. That's quite an evolution, Eleanor observed. From family, outcast to sought-after professional resource. Life has interesting symmetries sometimes, I acknowledged with a small smile. The truth was, the Sheffield project had marked a turning point in my career. The visibility of the campaign had attracted attention from other potential clients. My portfolio now included work that reflected my authentic design voice rather than watered-down compromises. Most importantly, I approached each opportunity with clear boundaries and confidence in my value. The divorce had been finalized with surprising smoothness. Gregory had been fair in the financial settlement, even generous in certain aspects. We maintained no direct contact, but our respective lawyers reported professional cooperation throughout the process. My only personal request, keeping my original engagement ring that had belonged to my grandmother rather than the Caldwell family diamond Gregory had later insisted I upgrade to, was granted without argument. My regular therapy sessions with Dr. Lewis continued, though we had reduced the frequency from weekly to bi-weekly. Our conversations had evolved from processing acute emotional trauma to exploring healthier patterns for future relationships and continued self-discovery. The interesting thing about healing, Dr. Lewis had noted in our last session, is that it's rarely a return to your previous state. It's a transformation into something new that incorporates the experience without being defined by it. This observation resonated deeply as I navigated my reconstructed life. I wasn't trying to recapture who I'd been before meeting Gregory. I was integrating that younger self's passion and confidence with the wisdom and boundaries hard-earned through difficulty. Jessica visited Seattle for a long weekend, marveling at the changes in both my external circumstances and internal landscape. "You laugh differently now," she observed during a hike through Discovery Park. "More from your belly, less from your throat." "That's oddly specific," I teased. "But accurate," she insisted. "You used to laugh like someone who needed permission. Now you laugh like someone who's giving herself permission." These subtle transformations accumulated gradually. I found myself speaking up in creative meetings without rehearsing my thoughts first. I began dating casually, nothing serious yet, but enjoying the simple pleasure of connecting with interesting people without need for immediate definition. I joined a community garden and discovered unexpected joy in growing tangible, living things. An unexpected development came in the form of a friendship with Charlotte, Michael's wife. She reached out via professional email, ostensibly to inquire about design services for a pediatric clinic she volunteered with. Our initial coffee meeting evolved into genuine connection based on shared experiences as Caldwell outsiders and mutual professional respect. Amanda is actually taking parenting classes, Charlotte revealed during one of our lunch meetings. She's pregnant and determined not to repeat family patterns. The news surprised me, not just the pregnancy but Amanda's self-awareness. That's encouraging. "People can change when properly motivated," Charlotte observed. "The family dynamic shifted after you left, made some things visible that had been conveniently ignored. Whether my departure had been catalyst or merely coincidence, I took no particular credit for these evolutions. The Caldwell's journey was their own, just as mine was mine." 6 weeks after the marketing conference, I was selecting produce at a farmer's market when I heard a familiar voice. Amanda stood at the next stall, examining artisan cheese. Her pregnancy was visible now, creating a softer silhouette against her typically tailored appearance. Our eyes met with mutual recognition. After a moment's hesitation, she approached. "Vanessa, I didn't know you shopped here." "Every Saturday," I confirmed. "They have the best heirloom tomatoes in the city." The awkwardness between us was palpable, but not hostile. We exchanged brief pleasantries about the market, the weather, the upcoming product launch. Then Amanda surprised me with unexpected directness. "I've been thinking about what you said at the conference, about contexts where you're dispensable versus valued." She adjusted her bag uncomfortably. "I'm discovering something similar in preparing for motherhood. Everyone has advice about who I should become, how I should change. It's illuminating." "Contexts shape us," I acknowledged. "But they don't have to define us." Amanda nodded thoughtfully. "The parenting class Charlotte probably told you about, it's helping me recognize some patterns, things I never questioned because they were just normal in our family." I heard the unspoken comparison to my own journey of recognition and separation. "Self-awareness is powerful," I offered. "Yes." She hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I don't want my child to ever feel like they need to disappear to be seen." The admission revealed deeper reflection than I would have credited Amanda with a year ago. I didn't offer easy absolution. Our history was too complex for that. But I did offer simple human acknowledgement. That's a good place to start. We parted with no dramatic reconciliation, no promises of future connection, just a moment of genuine communication between two adults sharing brief intersection in life's journey. Walking home with my market purchases, I reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought me from the Caldwell barbecue to this present moment. The challenge Amanda had unknowingly set, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice, had indeed been the catalyst for profound transformation. I had disappeared from a life where I was diminished, only to reappear in one where I was valued. I had lost a family that required my conformity, only to build a community that celebrated my authenticity. I had abandoned security that came with compromise, embracing instead the uncertain adventure of self-determination. Last week, I had closed on a small house near the water, nothing grand by Caldwell standards, but perfectly suited to my needs and purchased entirely through my own earnings. As I arranged my furniture and hung artwork selected solely for my own pleasure, I experienced a profound sense of having created not just a home, but a life genuinely my own. The greatest irony of Amanda's cruel joke was that disappearing had made me more visible than I'd ever been, to colleagues who valued my creativity, to friends who appreciated my authentic self, and most importantly, to myself. The challenge had been not just accepted, but transformed into unexpected gift. That evening, as Seattle's skyline glittered against darkening water, I opened my journal and wrote the reflection that had been forming for months. Sometimes we must disappear from others' narratives to discover our own. The most powerful response to being unseen is not demanding vision from blind eyes, but finding the contexts where our true selves are not just visible, but celebrated. The opposite of disappearing isn't being noticed. It's becoming so fully present in your own life that external validation becomes unnecessary. The woman who had raised a hot dog in Defiant Toast 1 year ago could never have imagined the journey ahead. The woman writing these words could never return to who she had been. And in that transformation lay not tragedy, but triumph, the quiet, sustainable victory of reclaiming one's own life. Have you ever had a moment when someone's cruel words actually pushed you to make a life-changing decision? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes walking away is the strongest move you can make. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it. I'm Olivia Reynolds, 28, and until 6 months ago, I thought being an event planner in Boston meant I'd automatically be included in my sister Amy's wedding. We grew up sharing everything, from clothes to secrets. But apparently not. Her special day. When Mom said they were keeping it small, I believed her, until Instagram revealed 80+ guests, including second cousins we'd met once. That betrayal cut deeper than any knife, leaving me with 2 choices: stay home nursing my wounds or find my own adventure. Iceland's majestic landscapes were calling, and I answered, never expecting my phone would soon be ringing with panicked wedding day disasters only I could solve. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me to discover how I learned that sometimes being excluded leads to the most extraordinary journey of self-discovery. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, Amy and I were inseparable despite our 3-year age difference. I still remember braiding her hair before school, defending her against neighborhood bullies, and staying up late whispering about our dreams, under blanket forts. Our matching Christmas pajamas and coordinated Halloween costumes spanned 12 consecutive years, documented in family albums that Mom proudly displayed in our living room. I was always the protective older sister, the one who taught Amy to ride a bike, helped her with science projects, and later gave her advice about boys and makeup. When she struggled with math, I spent hours breaking down equations until concepts clicked for her. I even skipped my junior prom to attend her dance recital when our parents had a scheduling conflict. My priority was always Amy's happiness, something our parents silently reinforced with their not-so-subtle favoritism. Dad would bring Amy surprise gifts, just because, while mine typically arrived only on birthdays or Christmas. Mom frequently praised Amy's artistic talents while my academic achievements received brief acknowledgments. I never resented this dynamic, accepting it as part of being the responsible firstborn who didn't need constant validation. After college, I threw myself into building my career, working 60-hour weeks to establish my reputation in event planning. The sleepless nights and networking hustle paid off when I landed my first celebrity client 3 years ago, planning a wedding that got featured in major magazines. That success snowballed into a roster of high-profile clients seeking my meticulous attention to detail and crisis management skills. Despite my increasingly hectic schedule, I always made time for family gatherings and especially for Amy, flying home 4 times yearly for holidays and significant occasions. Our relationship began shifting when Amy started dating Bradley Harrington 2 years ago. Bradley came from old money, his family owning several investment properties throughout New England and maintaining strict social expectations. The first time I met him at a family dinner, he spent 20 minutes explaining why my career was trendy but unsustainable and suggested I consider something more appropriate for long-term stability. Amy, once my fiercest defender, laughed, along with his condescending jokes. With each month of their relationship, Amy adopted more of Bradley's attitudes and his family's social protocols. She began criticizing my apartment as too bohemian, my casual dating life as lacking direction, and my fashion choices as trying too hard to be unique. Despite these growing tensions, I still treasured our sisterhood, believing our bond transcended these external influences. When Amy called announcing her engagement, I immediately cleared my schedule and flew home for an impromptu celebration, bringing champagne and handmade congratulatory signs. I spent that weekend genuinely happy for her, ignoring the way Bradley's mother examined my outfit with thinly veiled disapproval and how his sisters whispered when I mentioned my latest celebrity client. In my heart, I was already planning the perfect bachelorette weekend and reviewing bridesmaid dress options, assuming my maid of honor role was a given considering our history. The following month, during a Sunday family dinner, Amy nervously announced she had asked our cousin Megan to be her maid of honor, explaining that my unpredictable work schedule would make planning difficult. I maintained a supportive smile while something cracked inside me, but I immediately offered to help with planning instead, knowing my professional expertise could create the wedding of her dreams. Amy seemed relieved by my understanding response, and I genuinely pushed aside my hurt feelings, determined to support her happiness above my disappointment. That night, I called my best friend Zoe and cried for hours, but by morning, I had convinced myself that being involved in any capacity was enough. Little did I know this was just the first step in a systematic exclusion that would ultimately lead me to stand alone on an Icelandic cliff, while my sister's carefully constructed wedding day crumbled from across the ocean. 6 months before the wedding date, our parents hosted a Sunday brunch where excited chatter about venue options and color schemes dominated the conversation. I arrived bearing wedding magazines and a portfolio of vendor contacts willing to offer family discounts through my professional connections. Mom greeted me with her usual quick hug before turning her full attention back to Amy and Bradley, who were showing everyone photos of a historic mansion they were considering for the ceremony. As I settled into an empty chair with my coffee, Mom casually mentioned they were planning a small, intimate ceremony with just family and close friends. I nodded understandingly, even offering suggestions for making limited guest lists feel special through personalized touches. Actually, we've already hired Vanessa Mitchell to coordinate everything, Amy announced, referencing a local planner whose work I knew to be overpriced and unoriginal. Bradley's parents recommended her specifically. When I gently suggested some innovative ideas that wouldn't interfere with their coordinator's plans, Bradley's mother Charlotte interjected, "We prefer traditional approaches for family events, nothing too experimental." The dismissal was subtle but clear, leaving me to silently sip my coffee while everyone continued discussing details without seeking my input. In the weeks that followed, I watched as bridesmaids were announced on social media, dresses were selected, and engagement photo sessions were shared online. My calls to Amy became increasingly brief, with her citing wedding stress and busy schedules before rushing off the phone. March turned to April, then May, with no formal invitation arriving, while other family members began mentioning travel arrangements. The gnawing anxiety finally prompted me to text Amy directly. "Hey sis, just wondering if I should book flights for the big day? Haven't received any details yet." Her response came hours later. "Still finalizing some things. Venue has limited capacity and we're struggling with budget constraints. We'll let you know soon." The vague answer fed my growing unease, especially knowing Bradley's family wealth made budget concerns unlikely. A week later, during a rare phone conversation with Mom, I directly asked about my invitation. Her hesitation spoke volumes before. She finally said, "Sweetheart, they're keeping it very small. Amy thinks having you there might complicate things given your differences with Bradley's family. Maybe it's better this way, less pressure for everyone." The explanation landed like a physical blow, but I swallowed my hurt and pretended to understand, not wanting to create additional family tension. "Of course I get it. No problem at all," I lied, throat tight with unshed tears. I might have actually believed the small wedding excuse if fate hadn't intervened 3 days later. While scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break, I stumbled across photos from Amy's extravagant bridal shower posted by our cousin Megan. The elaborate event featured custom floral arrangements, personalized gift bags, and at least 30 guests, including several distant relatives I barely recognized. Confused, I clicked through to other tagged photos, discovering posts about hotel blocks reserved for wedding guests and excited comments about the big day from people I'd never met. Further investigation revealed a wedding website with detailed information about the 3-day celebration, including a welcome dinner, ceremony, reception, and farewell brunch. The guest count listed on their registry information: 80+ attendees. My hands shook as I scrolled through names of second cousins, Bradley's family's business associates, and even my parents' neighbors who had moved in after I left for college. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't about keeping things small or intimate. I was being deliberately excluded while everyone pretended otherwise. That evening, voice trembling, I confronted my mother via phone, demanding the real reason for my exclusion. After painful silence, she finally admitted the truth. "Bradley's family doesn't approve of your lifestyle choices, darling. They're very traditional and feel your career focus, urban living, and dating habits wouldn't align with the atmosphere they want to create. Amy didn't want to hurt your feelings, but she's trying to make a good impression on her new family." The words echoed in my apartment long after I'd hung up, each syllable confirming my deepest insecurity, that my own family had deemed me unworthy of inclusion on one of their most important days, offering me up as a sacrificial lamb to appease my sister's future in-laws and their outdated values. The weeks following this revelation became a blur of sleepless nights and tearful mornings. My normally meticulous work suffered as I found myself staring blankly at seating charts for other people's celebrations, while my own family had literally unseated me from theirs. Friends noticed my withdrawal, with Zoe finally confronting me after I canceled plans for the 3rd consecutive weekend. "You need to stand up for yourself, Liv," she insisted during an intervention dinner at my apartment. "They're gaslighting you about this whole small wedding nonsense and making you feel crazy for being hurt." Marcus, my colleague and close friend, agreed more bluntly. "Your sister is being a coward. If she's ashamed of you because some rich boyfriend's family disapproves, that's her moral failure, not yours." Their outrage validated my pain, but couldn't erase the growing emptiness that followed me through each day. With their encouragement, I attempted one final conversation with Amy, calling on a Tuesday evening when I knew she'd be alone while Bradley attended his weekly squash game. The conversation started civilly enough, with casual questions about wedding preparations, until I finally gathered the courage to address the elephant in the room. "Amy, I know I'm not invited to your wedding, and I know it's not about venue, size, or budget. Can we please just be honest with each other about why?" My sister's immediate defensive reaction told me everything. "Not everything is about you, Olivia. This is my day, and I need it to go perfectly without any drama or complications. Why can't you just understand that for once? Her words cut deeper than any previous exclusion. What drama would I cause exactly? By existing as myself, I countered, tears threatening. You know how you are, Amy snapped. Your whole independent, career-focused persona. The way you challenge everything traditional. Bradley's family is important to me, and they have certain expectations about family values. The argument escalated, until Amy finally blurted, maybe if you'd settled down instead of jumping between relationships and prioritizing your career above everything, you'd understand what family really means. I hung up, hands shaking, realizing my sister had fundamentally misunderstood everything about me. My career success and independent choices weren't rejections of family values, but different expressions of the same work ethic our parents had instilled in us. A subsequent attempt to discuss the situation with my mother proved equally fruitless. Darling, sometimes we need to make sacrifices for family harmony, she suggested, as if my dignity were a reasonable price for Amy's social climbing. Could you just understand and not make a scene? This wedding is stressful enough without adding complications. My father's response was perhaps the most painful. Complete silence. During a brief visit home when I tried to discuss my feelings, he simply stared at his newspaper, mumbling about women's business, and not getting involved. His passivity feeling like the deepest betrayal from the man who once promised to always protect both his daughters equally. Even casual family gatherings became minefields of subtle jabs, like when Bradley's sister Rebecca commented at a pre-wedding family dinner I'd been reluctantly invited to. It must be so liberating to focus exclusively on career without worrying about building a real family life. Or Bradley's father asking pointedly, do you think you'll ever settle into a more conventional lifestyle, or is this urban professional phase something long-term? Each interaction reinforced that I was somehow defective in their eyes, too independent, too career-focused, too myself. My therapist, Dr. Marshall, noted during our weekly session how my posture had changed, shoulders curving inward protectively. Family rejection touches our deepest insecurities, she observed as I described feeling increasingly hollow. But what if instead of dwelling in that rejection, you created new memories during that weekend? Something meaningful just for you? Her suggestion initially seemed impossible. How could I possibly enjoy anything while imagining my sister walking down the aisle without me? But that night, unable to sleep, I found myself Googling places to travel alone at 3 in the morning. The algorithm served me images of Iceland's otherworldly landscapes, massive waterfalls, black sand beaches, and the possibility of northern lights even in early summer. Something about those empty, beautiful spaces called to my wounded spirit. Go somewhere that makes family drama seem small, Dr. Marshall had suggested. What could make human problems feel more insignificant than standing before nature's raw power? The idea took root, growing stronger each day as I researched flights, accommodations, and tours. I told no one about my plans, quietly requesting time off work and arranging for a colleague to cover my ongoing projects. While my family assumed I would be home alone, nursing my wounds on the wedding weekend, I was meticulously planning my escape to another world, one where being excluded from a wedding would seem as insignificant as a single grain of black volcanic sand. 3 days before my scheduled departure, my phone lit up with an unexpected call from Mom. Olivia, thank goodness you answered, she began without greeting, her voice tight with stress. There's been a situation with the wedding. Vanessa, their coordinator, quit yesterday after some disagreement with Bradley's mother. A heavy pause followed before she continued. Amy is distraught. They're wondering if you might be willing to help out, just with some logistics and vendor management. You wouldn't need to attend the ceremony itself, of course. The request landed like a slap. Good enough to work behind the scenes, but not to witness my own sister's vows. I'm afraid that won't be possible, I replied, surprising myself with my steady voice. I've made other plans for that weekend. I'm going to Iceland. The shocked silence on the other end was almost worth the months of hurt. Iceland? But Olivia, this is your sister's wedding. Surely you can postpone a vacation. My mother's disbelief quickly transformed into guilt tactics about family obligations and how Amy was extending an olive branch by including me in this way. An olive branch would be an actual invitation, Mom, not a last-minute request for free professional services, while still excluding me from the celebration. After 20 minutes of emotional manipulation attempts, I ended the call with newfound determination, finishing my packing with a lightness I hadn't felt in months. The liberation of boarding my flight 2 days later was indescribable, each mile separating me from Boston feeling like shackles falling away. Landing in Keflavik under a sky of impossible blue, I collected my rental car and began the drive toward my guest house in Reykjavik, windows down to breathe in air so crisp it almost hurt my lungs. The landscape unfolded around me like another planet. Vast fields of moss-covered lava rock, stretching toward distant mountains, occasional sheep dotting the hillsides like tiny cloud puffs. My small but charming guest house welcomed me with Scandinavian simplicity, the owner Christian offering homemade bread and recommendations for local experiences, away from tourist crowds. That first evening, still adjusting to the disorienting midnight sun, I joined a group dinner where travelers shared their stories over Arctic char and roasted vegetables. Among them was Elisa, a 34-year-old local guide with intricate tattoos circling both wrists and a laugh that seemed to come from somewhere ancient. "You're traveling alone?" she asked, pouring me more of the local Brennivine spirit. When I nodded, she continued, "Good. Iceland reveals herself differently to those who come without companions." Learning I had 5 days in her country, Elisa offered to show me places most Americans never see, an invitation I gratefully accepted. The following morning, she arrived in a rugged jeep, tossing my suitcase in the back with instructions to bring only essentials for our first adventure. "Today we visit Thorsmörk, the Valley of Thor," she announced as we left the city behind, crossing rivers and navigating rocky paths that barely qualified as roads. During the drive, Elisa shared her own story of family complication. Her decision to become a guide instead of joining her father's fishing business had created a rift that took years to heal. "Sometimes the hardest thing is staying true to yourself when those who should support you most try to reshape you," she observed, words that resonated through my chest like the bass drum I could feel but not hear. Thorsmörk revealed itself as a lush valley nestled between 3 glaciers, its vibrant green shocking against black volcanic soil and snow-capped mountains. Hiking through this landscape felt like walking through the pages of ancient mythology, each step carrying me further from the pettiness of my family's rejection. At one point, standing breathless at the edge of a canyon, Elisa pointed to a massive waterfall in the distance. "Icelanders believe water carries away what no longer serves us," she said. "What would you like that water to take from you today?" Without hesitation, I answered, "The need for approval from people who cannot see." "Me, clearly." She nodded approvingly before leading me closer to the thundering water, where the constant mist created perfect rainbows in the sunlight. That evening, we joined 3 other travelers at a remote cabin where Elisa prepared traditional Icelandic lamb soup while northern winds rattled the windows. Sophie from Canada, Miguel from Spain, and Jens from Germany shared their own stories of family expectations and the freedom found in distance. Miguel especially understood my situation, having been excluded from his brother's wedding after coming out 2 years earlier. "Family thinks they reject parts of us they don't understand," he reflected, firelight dancing across his face, "but they really reject parts of themselves they fear." Under a sky that never fully darkened, our conversation continued until dawn, strangers becoming confidants through shared vulnerability and the peculiar intimacy travel creates. My 3rd day in Iceland brought the most transformative experience yet, a hike across Solheimajökull Glacier with Elisa leading the way, crampons strapped to our boots and ice axes in hand. The ancient ice groaned and shifted beneath us, brilliant blue crevasses revealing centuries of compressed time. Ice remembers everything, Elisa explained, pointing to sediment layers. It holds the past, but keeps moving forward, always changing shape. Standing small against that massive flowing ice river, my family drama suddenly seemed microscopic, a momentary blip in the vast timeline of existence. That night, bundled in thermal layers despite the summer season, we drove to a remote location, away from all light pollution. If we're lucky, Elisa promised, the auroras might dance for us even in June. Fortune smiled as faint green wisps gradually strengthened into undulating curtains of light across the northern sky. Tears froze on my cheeks as the lights pulsed. Above us, their ghostly dance both humbling and healing. Under that cosmic display, surrounded by new friends who accepted me without conditions, I felt something long constricted in my chest finally release. The universe was too vast, too wondrous to remain small beneath human rejection. Tomorrow is your sister's wedding, Elisa noted softly as we watched the lights. How do you feel about that now? I considered the question seriously before answering, like I'm exactly where I need to be. I woke on Saturday to pale sunlight filtering through handmade curtains in the small cottage Elisa had arranged for my fourth night, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before remembering. Today was Amy's wedding day. 7 hours ahead of Boston time meant the wedding party would still be sleeping while I sipped coffee by a panoramic window overlooking Lake Mevatin's volcanic landscapes. The strange peace I'd found over the past days remained intact until my phone began vibrating aggressively against the wooden nightstand, multiple notifications lighting up the screen simultaneously. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and a flurry of increasingly panicked texts from Amy herself. Curiosity overcoming my better judgment, I opened the most recent message. Liv, please call me. Total disaster here. Venue flooded overnight. From broken pipe. Everything ruined. Need your help desperately. More messages revealed the cascading catastrophe. The exclusive historic mansion they'd booked had experienced a major plumbing failure at 3 a.m., with water damage throughout. The main reception hall, their coordinator Vanessa, who'd already been replaced once, was unreachable, having apparently turned off her phone after a final argument with Bradley's mother yesterday. The catering company, upon learning of the venue change, was demanding additional fees for last-minute relocating that exceeded the wedding budget. To compound matters, the officiant had called with strep throat, barely able to speak. The perfect wedding Amy had excluded me from was disintegrating hourly. And now, suddenly I was worth contacting. My finger hovered over the delete button, 13 hours of flight time providing a convenient excuse to ignore these messages until everything was long over. A vindictive voice inside whispered how satisfying it would be to let them handle the crisis they'd created by pushing away the one person whose entire career centered around solving such problems. That temptation lasted approximately 30 seconds before another text arrived. This one, a video message from Amy, her eyes red-rimmed and makeup streaked from crying. Olivia, I know I don't deserve your help after everything. You were right. Bradley's family pressured me to keep the wedding appropriate, and I was too weak to stand up for you. I'm so sorry. Please, if you can find it in your heart to advise us remotely, I'd be eternally grateful. The genuine distress in her voice triggered my long-established big sister instincts, despite my rational mind arguing against involvement. I stepped outside the cottage onto a small deck, breathing in the sulfur-tinged air while contemplating my response. Elisa's words from yesterday echoed, "How we respond to those who hurt us reveals more about our character than their treatment. Reveals about our worth." With resignation mixed with strange determination, I texted back, "Setting up video call in 20 minutes. Have someone give me full situation report." I quickly showered and dressed, setting up my laptop on the cottage deck with Iceland's otherworldly landscape as my backdrop. When the video connected, chaos greeted me. Amy in half-finished makeup, Mom pacing frantically, and Bradley arguing with someone off-screen about contract terms. "Everyone stop," I commanded, using my professional event crisis voice. 1 person speaks at a time. Amy, give me the exact situation. As my sister outlined the compounding disasters, I opened my professional contact list and began working while listening, sending rapid-fire messages to colleagues in Boston who owed me favors. First, the venue. Call Westbrook Gardens immediately. The owner, Janet, is a client of mine. Tell her you're my sister and need emergency relocation for today. She had a cancellation yesterday. While Amy made that call, I continued problem-solving. With surgical precision. For catering, contact Maxwell's Premier. Ask for Tony directly. Mention my name and offer 15% above normal rate for immediate service. They can mobilize a team within hours. The efficient problem required more creativity. Bradley, your uncle is a judge, correct? He has legal authority to perform the ceremony. Have your father call him immediately. As I dispatched solutions from 3,500 miles away, sipping Icelandic tea while a distant geothermal vent released steam behind me, I noticed Bradley's parents hovering at the edge of the video frame, their expressions shifting from disdain to reluctant appreciation as I efficiently untangled their catastrophe. Charlotte Harrington herself finally addressed me directly. I must say, Olivia, you're handling this with remarkable competence. The backhanded compliment almost made me laugh. This is literally my profession, Mrs. Harrington, the one you considered inappropriate for someone associated with your family. The slight flinch in her perfectly Botoxed forehead provided quiet satisfaction before I returned to the logistics at hand. For 3 hours, I directed the emergency restructuring of Amy's wedding, making calls, negotiating with vendors, and creating a revised timeline that would salvage the essential elements, while necessarily simplifying others. Through my laptop screen, I watched as initial panic transformed into cautious optimism, my professional network rising to the occasion with remarkable efficiency. When Janet from Westbrook Gardens sent photos of her staff already setting up for the ceremony, Amy burst into fresh tears, these of relief rather than despair. As vendors confirmed and solutions materialized, I noticed Bradley watching me with newly appraising eyes. Your sister is extraordinary, he commented to Amy, loud enough for me to hear. I had no idea her connections were so substantial. The realization that my exclusion had been based on completely misjudging my professional stature added yet another layer of irony to the situation. By mid-afternoon Icelandic time, with the wedding now just hours away in Boston, the crisis had largely been averted. The ceremony would proceed at the arguably more picturesque Westbrook Gardens. Catering was confirmed with an adjusted menu. Bradley's uncle had agreed to officiate, and emergency florals were being repurposed from another event ending that morning. Before ending the call, Amy asked everyone to leave her alone with me virtually. When we were finally in private, my sister's careful facade crumbled completely. I've been horrible to you, Liv. Letting Bradley's family dictate who should be at my wedding, excluding my own sister to impress people who will never truly care about me the way you do. Can you ever forgive me? The question hung between us, spanning oceans and time zones, weighted with years of complicated family dynamics. I'm working on it, I answered honestly. But Amy, you need to understand something. I helped today because I love you, but this doesn't erase the hurt. Trust takes longer to rebuild than a wedding day. She nodded, tears flowing freely now. I know. I just hope this can be a beginning. And Liv? Iceland looks beautiful on you. I can see something different in your eyes. As we said goodbye and I closed my laptop, I realized she was right. Something fundamental had shifted inside me during these days of self-imposed exile. The wedding would proceed without me physically present, but for the first time since this ordeal began, that fact no longer defined my worth. 2 weeks after returning from Iceland, with its landscapes still vivid in my dreams, I received a text from Mom requesting my presence at Sunday dinner to discuss recent events. The formal wording and uncharacteristic advance notice signaled the importance they attached to this gathering. Despite my instinct to decline, Dr. Marshall encouraged me to attend with newly established boundaries intact. "You've changed through this experience," she reminded me during our session. "Now is your opportunity to demonstrate that change." Arriving at my parents' Connecticut home exactly on time rather than my usual 15 minutes early, I noted 4 cars in the driveway. Mom, Dad, Amy, and Bradley were all present. The knowledge that I would face the complete assembly of those who had excluded me sent adrenaline coursing through my system. But something else accompanied it now. A steadying confidence born from standing alone on Icelandic cliffs and surviving. Mom opened the door with nervous energy, her typical quick hug replaced by an awkward hovering as if unsure of her welcome in my space. I moved past her with calm purpose, entering the living room where everyone waited in uncomfortable silence. Dad stood immediately, uncertainty etched across his features, while Amy and Bradley remained seated on the sofa, hands tightly clasped. "Olivia," my father began, using my full name as he did in serious moments. "We're very glad you came." The implied surprise that I would actually show up spoke volumes about how they viewed my legitimate hurt as mere petulance. In earlier times, I might have immediately worked to ease their discomfort, apologizing for my completely appropriate boundaries as if they were unreasonable impositions. Iceland transformed Olivia instead, took the armchair facing everyone, sat down her purse with deliberate movements, and waited. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Mom attempted her standard deflection. "Well, this has all been quite dramatic, hasn't it? But family is family, and we should put these little misunderstandings behind us." The dismissive characterization of my systematic exclusion as a little misunderstanding might once have made me question my own perceptions. Now it merely confirmed how necessary my emotional distance had become. "This wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom," I stated calmly. "You all made deliberate choices to exclude me from a significant family event, then lied about the reasons. I'd appreciate if we could at least acknowledge that reality before attempting to move forward." My directness visibly startled them, particularly my father, whose discomfort with emotional confrontation had always been pronounced. Amy spoke next, her voice small. "Olivia's right. We need to be honest about what happened." She turned toward me, shoulders squared, despite her evident anxiety. "I allowed Bradley's family to influence who should be included in my wedding because I was desperate for their approval. I prioritized their judgment over our relationship, and I justified it with excuses instead of having the courage to tell you the truth." Bradley, surprisingly, added his own acknowledgement. "My family has very traditional views about success and life choices, particularly for women. They saw your career focus and independent lifestyle as somehow threatening to their values. Should have challenged their perspective instead of enabling their judgment, especially after seeing how brilliantly you salvaged our wedding day from across the world." His admission appeared genuine, though I noted it still placed primary blame on his family rather than his own participation. My mother attempted to redirect with practiced skill. "Well, we all make mistakes in family dynamics. Remember when Grandma excluded Aunt Sarah from that Thanksgiving after the political argument? These things happen in every family." The false equivalence and attempt to normalize serious hurt triggered the precise, measured response I'd practiced with Dr. Marshall. "This wasn't a universal family experience, Mom. This was a specific choice to exclude me because my life doesn't conform to Bradley's family's narrow definition of acceptable womanhood. You chose their comfort over your daughter's inclusion, then misled me about the real reasons. That requires more than dismissing it as normal family drama." Dad, who had remained characteristically silent, suddenly straightened his posture. "Olivia is right." His unexpected intervention silenced the room. "We failed her completely. I failed you, Olivia. I stayed quiet when I should have insisted my daughter be included in her sister's wedding regardless of anyone's disapproval. My silence made me complicit." His voice broke slightly on the last word, emotion unprecedented from my stoic father. The acknowledgement created a small crack in my carefully maintained composure. We spent the next 2 hours in the most honest conversation our family had ever experienced, painful truths emerging about long-established patterns of favoritism, conformity expectations, and conflict avoidance that had shaped our family dynamic for decades. I maintained clear boundaries throughout, neither accepting insufficient explanations nor allowing the discussion to devolve into unproductive guilt spirals. When Bradley mentioned his sister Catherine's upcoming engagement and her interest in having me plan the wedding, "She was extremely impressed by your crisis management skills. I recognized the offer as both olive branch and implicit acknowledgement of my professional value." "I appreciate the consideration," I responded carefully. "My schedule books months in advance, but she's welcome to contact my office formally." The subtle repositioning of our relationship, from excluded family member to sought-after professional whose time carried premium value, wasn't lost on anyone present. As the conversation drew to its natural conclusion, Amy suggested family therapy sessions, an idea so unprecedented in our conflict-avoiding household that it signaled genuine desire for change. "I've found individual therapy extremely valuable," I offered, meeting her halfway without overcommitting. "I would consider joining family sessions if everyone participates fully." Even more surprising was my father's immediate agreement, followed reluctantly by my mother's. Before leaving, Amy and I shared a moment alone in the kitchen, the familiar setting highlighting how much had changed between us. "I found your travel photos online," she admitted. "Iceland looks incredible. Those northern lights, did they really look like that in person?" The simple question opened a brief connection around something unrelated to our conflict. Actually, they were more beautiful than any photo could capture. The lights seemed alive somehow, dancing across the sky. For a flickering moment, we were just sisters again, before Amy reached tentatively for my hand. "I miss you, Liv. Not just now, but for the past couple years. I let myself become someone I don't recognize." I squeezed her fingers briefly before, gently withdrawing. "I miss the person I thought you were too. Maybe we can both rediscover ourselves through honest conversation." Leaving my parents' house that evening, I realized that while Iceland had given me perspective on my family's treatment, it had offered something even more valuable: a clear vision of who I could be when freed from the constraint of seeking approval from those unwilling to truly see me. 6 months have passed since that fateful wedding weekend, months filled with gradual rebuilding and recalibration of expectations. The holiday season approaches, bringing its inevitable family gatherings and potential tensions, but I face them with newfound equanimity. Perhaps the most unexpected development came just last week when Elisa arrived at Boston Logan Airport, her first visit to America, staying in my guest room for 2 weeks before we embark on our return journey to Iceland during winter solstice. "I want to see those northern lights again, but this time at their winter peak," I told her during our planning calls. "And I want to stand on that same glacier, feeling small against something ancient and enduring." Our family therapy sessions continue monthly, each one uncovering layers of unspoken expectations and healing old wounds incrementally. Progress comes unevenly. 2 steps forward during an honest breakthrough, 1 step back when old patterns resurface. My mother still occasionally makes comments about my unusual lifestyle choices, but now catches herself mid-sentence, making visible efforts to understand rather than judge. My father, surprisingly, has become my most consistent ally, calling weekly just to check in, his newfound emotional availability a welcome evolution in our relationship. He recently confessed that watching me handle the wedding crisis from Iceland with such professional command made him see me as a fully actualized adult for the first time. "I've always been proud of you, Olivia," he admitted during a rare one-on-one lunch. "But I never properly expressed it because I didn't fully understand your world. I do now." The professional fallout from the wedding fiasco brought unexpected opportunities. Bradley's sister Catherine did indeed hire me for her upcoming wedding, her substantial budget and high-profile guest list opening doors to an even more exclusive clientele. More significantly, through Catherine's connections, I landed Miranda Falcone, the tech industry billionaire, as a client for her foundation's annual gala. The event's success led to a profile in Business Insider highlighting my crisis management expertise and unparalleled vendor relationships. Amy and I have established a fragile new connection, different from our childhood closeness but potentially more honest. During a recent afternoon shopping together, our first such outing in years, she confessed that her marriage to Bradley requires more compromise than she anticipated. "Sometimes I look at your freedom and wonder what I've given up," she admitted as we shared coffee afterward. Rather than offering platitudes, I acknowledged the complexity of her feelings. Every choice closes certain doors while opening others. The question is whether you're choosing based on your authentic desires or others' expectations. We're learning to have these more substantial conversations, replacing the surface chatter that previously masked our growing differences. The friendship I formed with Elisa evolved through regular video calls and shared book recommendations. Her perspective as someone who rebuilt a damaged family relationship offers practical wisdom during difficult moments. "Family healing isn't linear," she reminded me last month when a therapy session left me frustrated. "It spirals like our Icelandic weather, sometimes returning to familiar storms before clearing again. Perhaps the most profound change remains internal. The unshakable certainty that my worth exists independently from family approval or inclusion." I recently declined a family beach weekend that conflicted with a personal retreat I'd planned, something pre-Iceland Olivia would never have dared. "I'll catch you next time," I stated simply, without elaborate justifications or apologies. The freedom in that boundary setting felt more exhilarating than any professional achievement. Last night, standing on my apartment balcony beneath Boston's light-polluted sky where stars struggle for visibility, I found myself thinking about that night under Iceland's dancing auroras. The universe had offered a powerful metaphor. Sometimes, we must remove ourselves from familiar but dim surroundings to witness true brilliance. Being excluded from my sister's wedding initially felt like the ultimate rejection, but it ultimately propelled me toward the most significant self-acceptance of my life. The painful exclusion created space for extraordinary inclusion in experiences and relationships that truly honored my authentic self. As I look toward future family gatherings, I carry this truth. We cannot control others' capacity to value our presence, but we can absolutely refuse to diminish ourselves to earn a seat at tables that should welcome us without condition. This journey has taught me that sometimes the most loving thing we can do, for ourselves and ultimately for our relationships, is to walk away from spaces where we're expected to make ourselves smaller. The path back, if there is one, must be walked with equal dignity on both sides. Have you ever found yourself excluded from something important by the people who should value you most? How did you respond? Did you fight to be included or find your own path like my Iceland journey? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more authentic stories about family relationships and personal growth. Hit that like button if you've ever had to choose between meeting others' expectations and honoring your own truth. Thank you for witnessing my journey from exclusion to empowerment. May you find your own Iceland whenever life's disappointments try to diminish your light.